if you were new to camp, you would snipe hunt, right? And basically you would go with your dad or your uncle or whatever. He would hold a garbage bag.
Shine a flashlight in it.
Shine a flashlight. And people would be walking through the woods banging. You would be banging pots and pans. For whatever reason, snipe liked to come to the loud sound of pots and pans banging. Everybody else be walking through flashlight yelling, snipe, 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 snipe. And eventually, like, all of a sudden, like, whoever, your dad or whatever would fall on the ground and be like, oh, I got one, and... And we're back.
Hey.
HUNTR Podcast.
Welcome.
Episode 45, as the Strauss Llama indicated.
45.
Jesus, I'm confused. It is, we're recording this at the end of October.
Mm-hmm. October 28th today.
Yeah, stone throw from November. You're listening to this. It is November. Hail to November.
I feel like this month is gonna we could do like a before and after. I'm gonna start getting weary.
I know.
Yeah.
We're gonna look a lot different come November.
Mm-hmm. I did shave my mustache the other day.
I know. How about that?
Yeah. Well, we had that giant double drop tine show up, and I don't know. I just
felt a change.
Yeah, I felt
the winds have shifted.
Felt convicted to, but now I feel a little naked when I'm just wearing a beanie because I'm like have no.
Yeah, no
upper lip warmth.
Yeah.
Not that it was giving me much to begin with.
You best chapstick up or you're going to get windburnt.
Mm-hmm. I go a lot of chapstick.
Straight to the face. We put a deer in the ground last night.
Mm-hmm.
Harlan shot his first buck.
I know, dude. That's awesome.
It was really cool. It was, I mean, we had several opportunities presenting themselves, and the big thing was really to just kind of get him situated after that opening day, bad shot essentially. And, worked really hard at it. And, we reviewed a lot of things, and I told him, I said, hey man, even if we're in the blind and if you're not sure, I said, we don't have to shoot. Like just get used to deer coming in close. And like those first couple came in close does and he was worked up.
Yeah.
And we missed an opportunity at a 4 point.
You guys were sitting in a muddy box plant behind the house.
And
is it a Brasco plot?
Winter rye.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And there's some clover in it too.
Yeah.
And scrapes on the edges. I mean, it literally is 150 yards from the house. Carter shot his first buck, a 4 point in it last year during rifle season, and Harlan shot his first doe in it in the late season. Like, a box blind, especially a muddy or a hawk, are expensive, worth every penny. Like to be in that with kids when you need to have movement and you got to get away with it. Plus, I mean, we had deer within literally 5 feet of us in that scent. I didn't even worry about the wind. Just sat in a box blind.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's cool. He made a amazing shot, went 30 yards, and yeah, it's freaking awesome.
Very cool, man.
Really cool experience. So one down.
Did you guys process them last night?
So I skinned them out last night, kept them out. I cut out the tenderloins last night. I always do that. Cut the tenderloins out right away, and then I'll process them.
You gonna hang them for a while, or
it's gonna get a little bit warm?
Dude, I've been thinking about that. I know it's gonna be expensive, but I really want to do like a cooler up at my parents' place.
I wish I could. Like in a perfect scenario, I would hang that thing for 2 or 3 days at least.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gonna be.
That's always been kind of a mystery to me. I've heard of guys hanging them as much as like
weeks,
2-3 weeks. I've never done that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody's got their own. Like, I still think if you prep it correctly, food wise, like, I love the way it tastes, and it's a 1 year. He shot a 1-year-old buck. Like, it's gonna be tender.
I guess I don't know if I've ever had a deer that was aged that long or that hung that long. We
I've
always process ours like first or second night, and
yeah. So I let him hang last night. I cut all around the neck and all the main veins and arteries to try to drain all the blood out while he's hanging. And then today I'll go and just basically debone the whole thing. And I'll get it in the Yeti ice. And then I might not process them for 2 or 3 days and just kind of let them soak, make sure all that blood gets out, drain it every once in a while. And then I'll actually process the meat and bag it.
Interesting.
So
I've never done anything as far as draining the blood.
Yeah, just so like I don't like it sitting in the bloody water because like it's some people actually will put some salt in there too to help pull out that blood and those toxins essentially from the meat. I put a little bit of salt in there, but not a lot, and just every time I see some bloody water, I just drain it and clean
from
ice.
the cooler.
Mm-hmm. But on a hang, I always do. That's the reason I hang them, is to drain that blood out of the body.
Yeah, well, we've always taken, like, when I take them off the bone, it goes straight into a vacuum seal bag.
See, I usually will put mine in the cooler for a while, and part of it's time. Like, I might want to hunt tomorrow, so I don't want to have to process all night.
Sure.
So, but I'll just put it in the cooler.
We've gotten pretty good at it.
And go.
I can get a deer done in an hour.
Yeah. So we're excited.
We don't do hamburger and stuff, though.
I'll probably, I put the tenders in the fridge. I'll probably cook them tonight. He's like excited. He's like on cloud 9 right now. So
Yeah, I bet.
I'm like, yeah, man, you want to cook some?
He'll probably cook
some
them for lunch himself. He'll be out grilling on you.
I printed out like a picture of him with his deer, and he took it to school in his backpack.
Probably signing them, handing them out.
Hey, you want this?
Harlan Flynn, here you go.
Signing little.
Here, I got one for you.
Don't go signing any little girl's chest.
Teacher.
Not yet. Don't do that. Yeah, you'll get expelled. But yeah, tradition. And cool thing today, so our guest today is Dan Schmidt from Deer and Deer Hunting. And Dan and I have known each other for a long time. I wrote for Deer and Deer Hunting for, 10 plus years. And so last year when Carter killed his buck, he shot his buck at like 7:05 on Sunday morning, the first Sunday morning. And that was the first Sunday in Pennsylvania that we could have hunted in 100 years.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if we ever could have. And so it was cool because, like, I told Carter, like, I'm sure it wasn't, but potentially he was like the first Pennsylvanian to legally shoot a buck on a Sunday, because it was like literally right after shooting light he shot. And so when I put it up, Dan and Deer and Deer Hunting had shared that thing and said, like, this is why Sunday hunting in Pennsylvania is so important. So it's just a cool thing and just a connection that we have to Dan today. But Dan's obviously a wealth of knowledge. He's been with Deer and Deer Hunting for a long time. Still probably I would say the primary whitetail publication. And has brought a lot of experts through. And so, should be a pretty cool talk. Wisconsin guy, deep rooted traditions.
And so you're more familiar with Deer and Deer Hunting than I am, but they're known for the rut predictions. Like, that's one, and they do calendars as well.
Calendars. I mean, the magazine's the big thing.
Okay.
And I mean, it always has been. Deer and Deer Hunting magazine has been, a long.
They've been around for
tradition.
a long time.
Yep. The rut predictions is usually probably their biggest issue.
And Dan does those?
So, yes. And it used to be Charlie Alsheimer, which we'll get into with Dan here. And Charlie was kind of one of the moon phase guys, right? Back into this whole cycle, no pun intended, of moon phase. But his was more based on the actual phases, not red moon, and really how the phases affect the rut. And so Dan will break it down for us.
Get your BS alarm ready?
Yeah,
Colton?
but it'll be interesting,
We'll
man.
see.
I mean, you got to come into it as a skeptic, but there are plenty of people I know, because I know how many rut calendars Dan sells.
Oh, the rut calendars.
A lot of them are moon phase
We gotta get one of
prediction
these.
type calendars. So I might have one.
Okay.
I probably bought
I gotta
one.
check it out. Hey, I got a side note for you. So I've been at the farm. I'm trying to spend as much time up there as I can as we're getting into things here. Had a good conversation with Dad and Mom yesterday about what we talked about with Craig, as far as taking some of the agriculture ground out and letting it. I don't have a good name for it yet. Just regeneration.
Yeah, succession.
Whitetail habitat. Yeah. And so Dad kind of broke the finances of the farm down for me, which was cool to see that they're profitable based on crop leasing.
What's he getting a cash rent acre?
75.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Like, almost everybody I've talked to, in fact, I was looking at a piece of property up here on the mountain, because it was like, and that could be an investment piece, $50 an acre.
Yeah.
75 is really good probably for that area.
Yeah,
as you get into the central part of the state, it's 150 to 175.
I've talked to some other people that are doing cash rent in our area, and 75 seems to be the going rate.
Remember, I said southeast, where I want to buy, is like 45 to 55.
Yeah, but so he phrased it. He's like, well, I'm profitable in this amount, X thousands of dollars. It's a couple thousand grand. And I was like, he's like, I have to pay taxes. And I was like, cool, I can help you with that. So from here, I'm going to, I think they're up for it. And
cool.
I found a couple pieces that had been let go naturally, and it looked great. And
it'll make a huge difference.
And so Mom is, you ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding? They say like the dad is the head of the household, Mom's the neck that turns the head any way she wants. So I took Mom out and I showed her what that looks like, and she was all about it. So I'm going to
have to throw some wildflower seeds in there for Mom and stuff. She'll be fine.
I'm going to hop on Hunt Stand probably later and
very cool,
and drop some areas that I want to
shoot a little segment on that.
I want to do that with, and I think he'll be up for it. So I'm looking at taking 20, 25 out of ag.
I love that.
And there's some additional stuff.
So are you going to spray some of that pasture too?
Yeah. So what I want to do, because that's just a lot of work, man. I don't have a big sprayer, and there's 50 acres there I could do. I'm going to see about having a farmer come in and spray it for us.
That'd be good.
So what I need to do is re-engage Craig, and I want to really understand the details of, like, do I have to turn it over to have to disc it? Because that's a lot more work than if I can just get it cut and sprayed.
I think you just cut and spray.
Mm-hmm. That'd be awesome.
That's my understanding.
That'd be awesome.
Very cool. Well, let's bring in this week's guest, Dan Schmidt.
Hey.
How are you, sir?
Good.
We were Colton and I earlier were just kind of depicting the old times behind you there in your picture, and the old days of hunting. Yeah.
Look at those mustaches.
I know. It makes me jealous at that point.
Yeah. Put us to shame. Yeah.
Yeah. I almost have to shave every time I see that picture. Well, Dan, first of all, man, we appreciate you coming on. And I kind of gave the prelude to you and I have known each other for quite a while. You know, and I've done some stuff with you guys at the deer hunting side on a written part of it. But just for some background, you know, and let's start with just kind of the history, but I also want you to kind of talk about some of the recent changes, you know, especially on yours and Brad and Steve, and Steve's side. But, you know, let's talk a little bit about history of deer hunting as a company and as a publication, if you would.
Sure. Try to do it real quickly because it's a long history, as you know. For especially the younger viewers, if you don't know this, and I'm not saying that because I've worked here for such a long time and because I have such an affinity for this brand, but deer hunting by and large is responsible for kickstarting the whitetail industry. Those two guys from Appleton, Wisconsin were way ahead of their time. It basically started as a deer camp north of, if you don't know Wisconsin, just think north of Green Bay a little ways. There was a deer camp, and they called themselves the Stump Sitters. And they were just a group of guys that loved to hunt. It was in the 60s. And Jack Brower was an insurance salesman. Al Hofacker was his babysitter. Jack is about, I don't know, Jack's probably going to beat me up for not knowing this, but he's about 10 or 15 years older than Al. And Jack had a young family. Anyways, they went deer hunting every year. These guys loved it. I mean, they were in the 60s. They were geeking out about how can we, you know, learn more about deer. We want some really just concrete stuff. So basically what they did is they started a little local group of guys that would share logbook entries, and they would write down all their notes. And then when Jack would go traveling in the wintertime, they hunted public land. Al would scout these forests just meticulously, and he would document every deer trail, every deer yard, bedding areas, everything. He mapped it all out, handwritten notes, and they would share this. And he would actually take black tacks and put them on the trees for the deer trails so the other hunters wouldn't see them. And then in fall, those guys knew, you know, so this is winter, and then fall, they know, okay, these are actually the main deer trails going back to these bedding areas. So that's, I'm going to say, you know, my dates might be off a little bit, 67, 68, 69, right around in there. It kind of got rolling a little bit. And then by 1973, they actually incorporated the name Stump Sitters, actually as a business. And all they did was they just, they shared logbook stuff with people. Well, by I think it was about 77 was the first issue of the magazine. But before that, Richard Smith, who you probably know, legendary outdoor writer from Michigan, he was the third member to sign up for the Stump Sitters when they became people learned about it and you could just send in your money.
Yep.
Well, they send you a patch, and he said, well, don't we get like a newsletter or something? You know, I mean, aren't you going to share this stuff with us? We've been sending our logbook entries.
Right.
And Jack and Al gathered in, I think it was Al's mom's kitchen table in Appleton, and they sat down. Now, Jeremy, you will appreciate this. Jared, you will too, because I claim this is the first SEO research ever in America before we even had the internet. So they're sitting at the kitchen table. I believe it was in March of 1977. And Jack says, well, what are we going to call this newsletter? And Al said, well, it's about deer and it's about deer hunting. So why don't we call it Deer and Deer Hunting?
That's fine.
And that's how the magazine started. Now I wish I could, here, I'm going to just hold with me for 1 second. This is one of 4 in existence. I have it.
Oh,
That's
wow.
the first issue of Deer and Deer Hunting. It's 2 11x17 pieces of paper stapled together.
Oh, cool.
Wow, man.
And that was the first quote unquote magazine.
Who did the, does it say who did the sketch on the front?
I don't know. I'd have to actually open that up and find
Yeah,
it.
don't do that.
I'm not going to do that.
But that's cool, man. And so, Dan, when you start to think about that back in the day, number one, I think it's funny, the Deer and Deer Hunting name, because like I know even with formations of my own companies, like that is the hardest part is like, what the hell do I call
Well, you
this
started
thing?
early enough. It wasn't taken yet.
Yeah.
That's
seats,
right.
seats taken.
Look at this domain. It's available. Who'd have thunk it?
But, you know, I think what's really interesting is the concept of, and dare we say it, because I do want to get into this at some point, but like that is kind of like the first social media that I know of, in that like it's a community of hunters who are communicating and sending things back and forth, though it was via snail mail, right?
Yep.
Like that literally is what it is today, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's really interesting when you start to kind of look and kind of process that side of it, is that, you know, yes, there's a lot of differences and things, especially against our industry in the social media world. And Dan, that's part of that is the post that you made the other day in terms of the, you know, plagiarism that tends to go on in some of these spaces. But I think that what's really interesting is that kind of was one of the earliest things that I remember from a hunting industry side that truly would be a platform or relation to today's social media.
Absolutely. And when you think about the tenets were there, what we have today is just mind blowing with video and social media platforms. And I mean, and I think you're not that old, but you're old enough to remember how hard it was to kill a deer. Well, today there's so much information.
Sure.
There's so much, we have things managed so much better. You weren't having to go out. I mean, some people still obviously hunt public land. I've got public land right next to me, but you didn't know anything and you didn't know how to do it and you didn't have anybody to lean on. Today, you can jump on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you want to go. There's somebody giving you advice. And here just at the office, I've got a couple of young people who have never hunted before, and we've got them on the fast track where it took us years.
Well,
we didn't know.
I was going to say, I mean, like when I grew up hunting, you know, especially in, let's say my early teens to high school, you know, one of the resources that I always turned to was Deer and Deer Hunting magazine, because frankly, from like a content video perspective, it was like, hey, every Sunday night, Buckmasters, Realtree Outdoors on TNN. Like there wasn't Outdoor Channel, there wasn't YouTube. Like it literally, the content that I consumed to kind of mold me from a hunter came from print.
Yep,
that's what it was.
That was all of us.
Yeah.
You know, and going back to the magazine, you know, yeah, you had Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, and Sports Field, but they were generalist publications.
Generalist.
They had whitetail stuff, but nobody was deer geeky. I mean, there were people that were deer geeky. Obviously, Jack and Al were, and other people were, but nobody even thought about it. And just another quick note there is they met Fred Bear in right when they started, and I have pictures somewhere of it, and Fred did not see it. He just said, I don't, he goes, I think it's too vertical of a niche. I don't think, he said, people only deer hunt for a few days in November. He said, I don't see you having enough content to fill up more than a couple magazines. So in that regard, what they captured there was pretty fascinating, because you look at everything revolves around the whitetail.
Well, yeah. And again, obviously no knock to a Fred Bear who is a huge icon, but Fred was a generalist. Yeah. I mean, he was hunting moose, he was hunting bear, he was hunting elk. Like he wasn't a whitetail guy. And frankly, like, even though I kind of consider myself, like Jared and I love the mule deer hunt, you know, I like the turkey hunt. Like I am a whitetail guy through and through. Yeah. And obviously being in this industry and working with a lot of manufacturers, like the industry revolves around whitetail. You can be an elk brand and you can be a turkey brand, but if you want to succeed, it revolves around whitetail deer. That's the industry driver.
And to those guys, to some of the guys, even Fred Bear's defense, those populations were not
exactly.
I was a rabbit hunter. We didn't have deer where I grew up. I mean, basically, I hunted rabbits and squirrels to my heart's content. And if you saw a deer, it was like, oh my God, was it a buck? I don't know. It had its tail up. Well, then it was a buck. You know, I mean, it was like people didn't know because you didn't, did he do this? Did he do that? It was almost this like mystique that we didn't have them. And then once those populations rose, then that thing really took. But I'd say it really took off like right around the mid to late 80s was when this thing really started cranking. And then now it's where we are today.
What seems to have been the biggest like driving factor for those populations to grow so much? Because Dan, I have conversations like on a weekly, if not every other daily basis with, the guys in my camp who are, probably your age. It's my uncle and a good friend of his and my dad. And they all describe, when they were my age, like exactly like you're saying, like, man, this deer, like to kill a deer with a bow was like such a feat, and even to see them, like they were just so, like mystified by it. And it was like the ultimate challenge to kill one with a bow. And I'm grateful for the opportunities that we have now. Obviously we're trying to kill big, old, mature deer and score is, a thing that comes into play and stuff. And, but I have definitely some regard for what those guys came up through. And it's just hard to understand because like to kill a deer with a bow now, Jeremy's son did it last night and he's 5. Anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Well, to answer your question, Jared and Jeremy, I know you're very schooled on this, but there's many prongs to that as far as, the populations. Okay. So if you even go back my dad's era and his dad's era, they did not kill does because we did not have deer. There weren't populations. So that was a sacred cow. You did not kill a doe.
And there's still a lot of guys that abide by that rule, right? It's been embedded in their brain.
Even guys who are so-called QDMers. Like, we don't kill the does.
Yeah, they're like, we don't shoot a doe.
QDM.
Exactly. We don't do it.
Funny.
I know.
But that helped build populations. But then if you look, there's so many things. Climate had a lot to do with it, especially here in the upper Midwest. We had record mild winters for many, many years for the past 30, 40 years. Yeah, you had some bad ones in there, but it wasn't like the historical bad winters where deer were migrating 100 miles, 150 miles to deer yards. It doesn't happen anymore. Habitat changes, a lot of urban sprawl, deer are animals of cover. There's all sorts of if you get to some of these suburban areas where guys can basically kill does till their ears bleed now because it's like there's little pockets of cover that can't get hunted and it's prime habitat. So there's a lot of things going on there for that. I think we're about Jeremy, like 32 million deer in the United States. I mean, it's and back at the turn of the century it was 500,000.
100%.
So it took decades and decades and decades to get there. That tipping point was probably, I'm going to say right around 1990.
100%.
It took off.
That's when that was it. That was that tip point.
And that's where, and now you got to a point where, and I've talked about this a lot, as a state, I wouldn't want their job. It's thankless. As a state deer manager, there's a tipping point also in your modeling process. Like when you're trying to manage a herd, like here in Wisconsin, I talk about it all the time because I've lived here my whole life, but we've had herds of 1.6, 1.8 million deer. Well, when you get to that, now your models are out the door and people are practicing QDM. And now it's really kind of it's basically taking a cup of water out of the ocean. You can't take enough out fast enough. I could talk about this for hours, but once you get those populations down, which they have in some states, to their management levels, here in Wisconsin, it's less than 1 million. So if you can get to there, then they can really kind of get their hands around it. But to answer your question, there's a lot of different factors, but a lot of it has to do with hunters, wanting to have more deer, and then habitat and climate.
I think the climate's an interesting point there, Dan, because so many people, obviously Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, we think very high dense hunting states, but even in Pennsylvania, you know, very rarely, and especially in the last 30 years, have we ever even had or people talk about winter kills, which historically, especially in the 40s, 50s, 60s, in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, or in Michigan.
Big deal.
Yeah, it was, 50% in some cases. In these severe winters where it was just deep snow,
Just
ultra
curious,
cold.
what do deer numbers look like in Canada? I assume they've always and still probably have these hard winter kills, right?
So if you look, and that's a great point, because if you look in Canada, although there is a lot milder winters than traditionally there have been, so thus the populations have
increased.
Well, yeah, everybody talks about Saskatchewan, Alberta, etc. as like a deer mecca, and it is. I mean, there's great deer, but they have to realize like there are like 6 to 8 deer per square mile.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
in
asking,
those areas.
because I know that a lot of deer doesn't necessarily mean big deer.
Exactly. There is number wise a lot of deer, but look at the amount of habitat and like untamed wilderness in those areas versus even where Dan's at in Wisconsin. You got big pockets of suburban and urban areas. So there are probably more deer in, let's say, the province of Saskatchewan, but they're so spread out that the density of the deer is very low.
The climate makes perfect sense. Like if not as harsh of a winter means less deer die.
Yep.
More, I understand that. But what about areas like, I mean, look at Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, these places that have never, to my knowledge, had really severe year after year winter kills. You know, it seems like they should have always been conducive to big deer,
but habitat not so much.
Why not?
Well, for
if anything, I would say it's getting more developed, right?
Well, it actually, I would say a lot of that area was so ag driven that there wasn't deer woods, like there wasn't deer habitat. In fact, the habitat coming back through efforts from USDA and CRP and things like that are what have made deer habitat stand out. Where traditionally it was just huge ag fields.
Interesting. It seems like that country out there, and even like Kansas and stuff, would be so vast that I mean, you couldn't possibly farm it all.
I think they,
even in the 80s, 90s, like the farming technology wasn't what it is today.
Yeah, but I think it was just vast.
I'd be interested to see the yields if we look at like a FSA or whatever report. Is it FSA?
Yeah,
is that right?
FSA.
And see what the yields were back then versus today.
Let me throw you a couple stats here, Jared.
Yeah, hit me, man.
So this is our Deer Hunter's Almanac. That's the new one that we
Sweet.
got for this year. Iowa, and this is I get this from people all the time. I know, Jeremy, you do too, because the biggest thing that I get here in 27 years that I've been doing this, and I kind of give up because I hit my head against the wall because people
don't give up. We're still.
Why can't we have deer like they have in Iowa?
Yeah,
soil.
Like, no, let's go to Jeremy's point with Pennsylvania. Okay.
Parcel size.
What, 800,000 hunters? I mean, we're talking 700,000 gun hunters, 265,000 bow hunters. Okay. So let's just say some of those bow hunters, let's just say 800,000 deer hunters.
Yep. And that's low traditionally. Like at one point in the 90s, we were in the million range.
800,000 deer hunters.
Yep.
17 million acres of woods.
Yep.
And they kill 435,000 deer.
Yep.
Okay. Now let's go to Iowa. So we're just saying 800,000 deer hunters. Iowa, 200,000 deer hunters.
Wow.
600,000
That's
fewer hunters.
Allocated deer tags, total buck tags.
Total.
So that's just the number of people
hunters.
that deer hunt in Iowa.
Yep. Including non-residents and residents.
They kill 100,000 deer off of 3 million acres of wooded land. So they have, and when I'm talking about habitat, 3 million acres of wooded land in Iowa, like Jeremy said, mostly an ag state. Pennsylvania, 17 million acres of woods, but they've got
4 times the hunters.
4 times the number of hunters out there. So that's why you can't do it. You can't. I mean, that's why it's so apples and oranges that you can't. It's really hard to comprehend 800,000 people deer hunting versus 200,000, and about relatively, I'm going to say, landmass. The state's the same size, but habitat-wise,
habitat-wise. Well, and to our point this morning, Jared, when we were talking about like, hey, why aren't we seeing big bucks here? It's pressure. So the moment you have 800,000, I don't care.
Yeah, they're getting shot.
Yeah, people are just putting pressure on them. Where in Iowa, frankly, they're not. Same with Kansas. They're not. They're just not putting pressure on those deer.
600,000 people out of the woods, and you will have those same deer.
100%. I mean, and don't get me wrong, we have some great deer. In fact, last year I chased what I would say was a gross boon deer in Pennsylvania. I've got a 160 on the wall there, but they're few and far between. And it's in areas that probably have relatively less pressure. And again, in these areas, even where I killed this deer in the 90s, guys tell me every time I go into their deer camp that they have, and it's 15 minutes from my house. They said in the 90s, when you were driving up that road, you could not drive past an area that was parkable without a car being there during rifle season.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, see, and we're kind of having two tandem conversations here that I'm sure are interlaced. I'm just not quite sure how. Like, I feel like I have a better handle on what of these factors we're talking about produces big old high scoring deer.
Yep.
And have much less of a grip on what factors are numbers of deer.
I think it is deer habitat.
And I think these two specifically are overlaced. Like the reason Pennsylvania has fewer big deer than Iowa is because of, in my opinion, parcel size and hunter numbers.
And probably habitat to a point. I mean, 17 million acres of wooded habitat that, frankly, a deer is an edge species.
Yeah, I don't think they need that much woods. I don't know if that's like...
They don't. That's why I'm saying that we don't have big deer is because we have more big blocks of timber that... In theory, deer can live there, but that's not where they thrive. They thrive on an edge.
Sure.
And when you have millions of acres of state or national forest that's just giant mature timber, no. I mean, deer can survive there, but they're not going to thrive there. Yeah. Whereas in Iowa, what else, Dan? Kansas.
Where there's less woods.
Less woods, more edge, they thrive. In those
what do you mean by edge?
A lot of food, a lot of edge, a lot less pressure. I mean, it gets really geeky, and I know you guys have read John Ozoga's stuff.
Yeah,
but
I haven't. What is
that?
One
that people dismiss is Jeremy, and I know you know this pretty well, but the whole social structure of the female segment of the herd is what suppresses antler development in most herds.
Oh, okay. I want to talk about that.
So let's back up and talk about John real quick. So John Ozoga.
My job here, Dan, is to ask stupid questions.
No. So. this is
I'm learning a lot.
This is geeky stuff, and Dan knows I love this. So John was at Michigan State. Yeah. So John was a professor at Michigan State.
Last name?
Ozoga.
I've heard it. Okay.
One of the foremost researchers in deer, period. A lot of survival based stuff because being in Michigan, winter kills, hunter pressure.
Yeah.
But I think John was one of the first people to identify, or I won't say identify, suggest social stress in a herd.
He was it was him and Lou Verme, but
there you go. Yep.
Yes.
So and I have talked about, and Jared, you and I have had this conversation, and there are people in my profession as a biologist, quote unquote, that will completely just blow it off when I say, hey, I really think that this herd has social stress. The reason,
really?
Yeah. Because
how can they possibly say that?
It's hard to quantify, right? It's hard to.
Okay.
And let's keep in mind, I mean, I'm not going to go and burn people, but state agencies, universities vary by the numbers, period, right? Whereas social stress is very...
Yeah, lots of things are hard to quantify. It's nuanced.
Observationally based. It's objective a little bit, but... And so when I'm talking to a property owner about managing their property, and the first thing I see is like, man, you've got just tons of bucks on your property. I said, you got to kill some of these bucks. And they're like, well, why? I'm like, there's a massive amount of social stress, right? A big buck doesn't want to be around other bucks. Just doesn't. That's why you see him solo, and he doesn't like to be there, wants to be isolated. But in John's case, he really looked at the female structure and hierarchical structure of how that lays out in a herd, but ultimately that diffuses to every deer in that herd segment.
Deer numbers.
Yep, deer numbers.
So what was the
dispersal?
What has that turned into? I mean, dude, if you guys or somebody has put out I don't think there's a clear answer.
I mean, John probably did that research, 80s or 90s, right, Dan?
Yeah, well, he did the research in the 60s and the 70s, but we've published numerous, not only articles, but his books and stuff like that actually... I know the one sitting on my desk right over there. It's called Life in the Female Society for Whitetails. But anyways, Jared, go ahead with your question before I go off on another tangent here.
Well, I guess I think the answer I'm looking for, or like the factors that I should consider in looking at like social stress on any property. What are you looking for there?
The way I try to explain it, and Jeremy, you can cut me off if you want.
Go, Dan.
The way I try to explain it to people is, as an individual property owner, there's chances are there's nothing you can do about it. It's basically it takes a concerted effort of an entire region and in states. But basically, the biggest social factors on the female society for deer is mature does. You might have heard me talk about this, but the way to look at, does live in maternally linked groups. So you've got, if you look at that landscape and you take that bird's eye view, you got interlocking circles, and you got doe groups. Yep. Well, those older does are going to occupy the highest rent, and the yearling does are going to occupy the lowest rent. What we find out in these populations with
what does that mean, Dan? What do you mean rent?
Basically, the best habitat.
Best habitat.
Those are going to have the best habitat.
Okay.
So if you're looking at, I can always set my watch by killing a yearling doe on this little piece. It's 15 acres next to a state park, which is mature forest. Really bad habitat.
No, you're all right. We're rated R here.
Every opening day, I can kill a yearling doe there because she gets pushed to the.
I've actually got a great example. Just yesterday, I was driving out of our spot, and I see these yearling does bedded in like little woodlots by the road with very little cover. And
they're displaced.
It's rarely mature does that I see doing that.
Displaced.
Interesting.
So you're going to have that, but then when you have these, so that the mature doe, she's not only dominating her female siblings, she's dominating the male siblings.
Okay.
And then what the other problem that we have with modern deer, like I said, we could talk all day on this, but with modern deer management, with modern deer management, and here you can have as many doe tags as you want.
Yep.
There's 6 with your license.
Yep.
So what does everybody do? They go out and they kill the biggest ones they can
100%.
see.
Yeah.
So now what you have, especially in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, you still have high populations of deer, but they're primarily dominated by young individuals. So you have a 2.5-year-old doe as the matriarch. That is chaos because that pecking order for that female habitat overlay is usually you know what I'm saying? You usually have, in a QDM model, you have equal representation.
Sure. At least some sort of balance
of age class.
But now when you don't have that and you have basically a bunch of 15-year-old girls, that's probably a bad example.
No, it's great.
They don't listen to this podcast.
I'll just say not gender specific. You have a bunch of teenagers ruling the group.
Yeah.
It causes chaos. It causes stress on those young bucks when they're dispersing, when they're trying to take up habitat and things like that. And that's what John got into. He spent decades.
And that has to do with like lack of leadership from an older age class of doe?
Yeah, and it's just in a natural, bad example in our case right now, but think about like if the government was overrun and there was no government, there was no leadership, right?
Well, hard to imagine.
That's why I said I preluded myself there. But essentially, the collapse would happen underneath, or the disorganization would happen underneath without structure.
Sure.
Right, and a lot of it comes from these older does in the herd. They educate themselves just like a buck will as he gets older, and he educates himself on the habitat, on where things are. On the best suited places for security.
I know that, and this isn't rooted in anything, but I've thought, like when guys talk about, well, I didn't shoot a doe because they had fawns with it and stuff. I've thought in my head, well, I don't want smart bucks. Like, I don't want their mom to teach them how to see me in a tree stand.
Well,
I'm going to shoot that doe.
Again, I love the real life because it's subjective, but this is
well, and
I
assume it's debated too. I assume there's
100%. Well, that's why the research community, when you bring up social stress, like we're now down to testing literally deer shit, right? We're testing for
chemical imbalance,
these imbalances in deer feces to determine stress on a deer or stress in a herd. It's just trying to quantify it, and not everything in deer hunting has to be overanalyzed, right? It can be very subjective. But I'll give you another good example. So yesterday, I've got a really probably a 3 or 4 year old, in my opinion, doe with a button buck, right? Just a single button buck, one fawn. I've seen them around the house, right? Yesterday, there's a little section right next to my yard that the kids dump a bunch of acorns in and stuff and like play in, and they come in and they literally sleep. Like I have pictures on my phone of both the doe and the button buck head tucked sleeping. So I see them last night when Harlan and I are hunting, and they work down, and the button buck's working a little scrape and stuff, but mom's like super alert, right? today they're back in the same spot right next to the house. Even though my dogs bark at them, because she knows that she's not going to get hurt there. She's not going to get hunted there. The dog's in the fence. Like she knows that area in this little square section, and there's a bunch of thick green briar right behind. She's got escape routes.
Sure.
Like she just knows that it's smart. And that imprinting is happening on that buck fawn.
Yep.
So and he still is too, right? Throws all caution to the wind because mom's got his back. Eventually, that could be a smarter 1-year-old and a smarter 2-year-old.
Yep.
And eventually he learns.
Well, there's no doubt. Yeah, they teach them. They have to. They have to learn. I mean, some of it's instinct, I'm sure, but.
And again.
You know what? I've seen, and Dale mentioned to me the other day, this is my uncle, he commented on seeing a doe like teach her fawns to do something. Like she walked up and smelled something and then like looked at her, and then the fawn came up and smelled it, and he perceived that like it understood and was like, oh,
and so
we don't
the
like that.
Script to the traditional herd structure in a Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
Which is what? What is traditional?
Traditionally, it had been very young age structures, right? We killed only 90% 1.5-year-old bucks, right? Because there was no antler restriction.
Okay.
The doe herd, because we had a 3-day doe season, had a little bit of structure into it. But in the 2000s, when we went to concurrent to reduce that herd, we essentially just whacked it brown and down, there was a couple years there that we had plummeted that herd, and I think we had basically flipped that structure from fairly balanced on the matriarch side to very young, just like the buck side. And I think it caused chaos.
So what happens if it's the other way around? What if I just shoot all fawns and all you have is old does left?
They'd blow at you.
Okay, what about as far as the herd structure and this chaos?
Well, you're always going to have youngs coming in because of having an older age class of does being able to fawn likely 2 fawns. So you're always going to have them in, but you're never, because of the way that it's structured, you're always going to have, and especially in a state like Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, you're always going to have a lot of hunting pressure, which is by nature just subjectively is going to sample a chunk of the population out from each age class, unless you're protecting bucks via antler restrictions, which is a whole different wormhole.
Another interesting thing there, Jared, back to your question about what would happen if you just shot the fawns.
Yep.
Well, I've never seen that scenario happen, but what another Ozolga research project was that in those herds where this was natural mortality.
I was going to say those deer are probably more likely to die at natural causes.
They are. They're usually the winter kill.
But what happened, like when he was studying it in Michigan and in Cousino, that square mile enclosure, basically when the fawn mortality was high, there was a preponderance then for those does to have more doe fawns.
Right.
Okay.
And that is another fascinating. I mean, now we just published that. Jeremy, you can help me. There was the rose petal effect, and then there was the other one was called the. Basically, it's sex ratios.
Yeah.
And I'm not turning this down a spiritual way, but if you don't believe in God, just read about how deer herds, how the doe can almost control the sex of her fawn. It's just amazing, based off of those things, based off of the number of the females, based off the number of the survival rate.
What is that effect called? I've heard something similar in like coyotes.
There's actually 2 competing theories. One is the rose
petals, and I think that's the one that's probably, I don't say it's the most popular of the 2.
And what does that describe?
Basically the ability to
basically to be able to
change, manipulate
the sex of her fawn based off of the conditions she's in.
And
now some
a flower having both male and female parts.
That's not possible, but they actually have. I got the book sitting right there. I mean, they actually have peer-reviewed research that backs this stuff up.
Okay.
I'm not saying that proven, but it's pretty.
Well, and
what's the other theory before?
I don't remember what the heck it's called, honestly. You remember?
And it has more to do with the resiliency of, like, if we're killing more does, they know to produce more.
One has to do with the condition of the deer itself.
It's pure mortality. It doesn't have to be just harvest. Could be natural mortality, disease.
And the other one has to do with the social stress of the herd, based off of, she does not have the habitat she needs, therefore her body is stressed, therefore she's going to kick out another buck fawn. If you look at the traditional states antler hunting, like Jeremy said, when guys well, not even those guys, because that was different. But when guys went out in the 50s and the 60s and they 4-pointer came by and they shot it, you had 85% mortality on antlered bucks. Okay? So basically what happened there was does were kicking out more bucks because the population was still high. They were not killing does. They were only killing bucks. So that basically it became almost this self-fulfilling prophecy of we're going to have a preponderance. It's not 75%. It might be 55%.
55.
We're going to have a preponderance of male fawns born the next year. And that's the other, the name.
Well, and when you get into this stuff, like the hardest part I grasp, and this is where I'm uber critical of my, call it peers, right? Is that like, if I look at a state model, and Jared and I have talked to several state agencies, and I've talked to way more, and I'm sure you have too, Dan, like almost every state does their modeling for harvest projections and recommendations different, which is mind-blowing because it's a government line that we have set up, right? The state of Wisconsin borders and what happens there is not like some physical barrier, right? It's a governmental set line. And so when you think about like how Wisconsin does their stuff or how Pennsylvania does theirs, and it's like, well, you do yours this way. We talked to Chad Stewart at Michigan. Those guys are basically doing stuff like literally right before the season without even harvest data. And it's like, how are we fathoming this, and how is there not a standard practice?
Well, that's because it has more to do with, hunter opportunity than it does with.
Yeah, but even the hunter opportunity states of a Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, none of them calculate their models the same. They're all different.
Yeah, it is interesting.
And I agree with you. I mean, I could take this down another rabbit hole because
let's chase. Let's beagle.
Hunting regulations.
I have nothing else to talk about.
Why can I use a sever broadhead here in Wisconsin, but I can't use one or Colorado or wherever? Why can't I can kill a deer here? Why is it more lethal here than it is in your state?
And is that because of the potential barb aspect of it? Is that what they're saying?
It's archaic.
I know
some of these laws. Why can I use a lighted knock here, but I can't out in Idaho?
Why can't I place a trail camera in Arizona in 2022?
That's ridiculous. Oh, because you're going to scare the deer away and get them stressed out when they're shedding their what? Yeah, I mean, I've said the same thing. There should be some, and you guys won't agree with me on this, but I said I've morphed in my many gray years.
Oh, come on.
Deer hunting.
You want Biden just to do a mandate for all states on how to deer hunt?
Biology based. Tell me when I can hunt. September 17th to December 31st. Okay. How many deer can I kill? You can kill 2 bucks and 4 does. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Out the door.
What can I use? You have a nice day. You want to go.
However you want to hunt.
Don't go to Michigan.
Well,
I know, but people would lose their minds. But I'm like, why is it so? I go to another state. Well, did you read the regulations? And it's like the regulations.
I know.
Like,
so you guys don't think, or Dan, you don't think that like each state should have regulations based on its deer numbers and habitat and hunter numbers?
No. I think they should have it based on their. I think basically what the state's job as biologists should say. This is how many deer we need to have killed, and these how many are you be able to kill? You can kill. Let's just.
But in terms of legal weapons, baiting, non-baiting, like just all those out the window.
$2, you can kill 4 does, and if you want more doe tags, you can buy them. My belief, which hasn't always been this way, I said just let people go hunting. It's why you don't do it with duck hunters, you don't do it with pheasant hunters, you don't do it with rabbit hunters. Like, oh well, this week you can use a bow, this week you can use a gun. No, just go out, hear your tags. Especially in today's modern society, you're busy, you got things to do. Maybe you can't go hunting in November. But that's on the regulation side. On the management side, no, I think they should be managing for obviously population control and hunter recreation days. And I get why some people want their space, like bow hunters want their space, but I know I went off on a side topic there, but it's the same. It's basically the same concept. Which Jeremy is saying, it's like there's not and Ted Nugent is the one who, this was his quote. There's not a whitetail biology for Iowa and another whitetail biology for Wisconsin. It's the same deer.
Sure.
So if baiting is bad, why can I do it in Kansas and I can't do it in Michigan? You know, if give me another example of another, another situation. And like Jeremy said, as far as modeling goes, we used to have mandatory counts. Every single 618,274 deer that we killed in 2001, every one of those had a metal tag and they had to be driven to a gas station or a checkpoint. Mm-hmm. We no longer have that.
Yeah.
In some other states, when I compile this almanac, it was funny because I would call Alabama and I say, how many deer did you guys kill last year? And they said, well, what did Georgia say? And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I'd say, well, Georgia said this. Well, we'll get back to you. And then an hour later, they magically killed 500 more than Georgia did.
It's same with projecting population sizes within a state. That is, there's no possible way that they can give you a number with a confidence. And if they do, the interval around it is very, very wide.
Is there any kind of like federal or universal agency or institution that is available to these like state guys that would say, no, what are you guys trying to do? Like, trying to get numbers of deer? Are you trying to get quality of deer? If so,
because it's not a migratory animal or on any of the threatened and endangered species, it is a state managed resource.
Okay.
Period.
And so the states don't cooperate at all. They don't.
I mean, USDA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife are involved.
Okay, U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
When it comes down to a property that is managed by them, but it's based on state regulations.
So, I mean, I agree, Dan, with what you're saying. At least in the states that I hunt, there's a crazy amount of regulations and stuff. It's like, man, this is out of hand. I agree. I have to assume that at one point those were based, in trying to achieve some kind of goal. Like, hey, we want to have this many number of deer or killed, or we want to have this quality of deer so that we can bring in.
That's what I'm saying. There is no standard.
Isn't there? Like, it's based on something.
Everybody has a model.
Based on science. It would be cool to, is that like published anywhere? To like
100%.
Does Pennsylvania come out and say, our goal for the 2022 hunting season and the herd is to do this, and because of that, here are the regulations?
Yes,
they do.
Yeah.
Which is why they'll allocate more doe tags or they'll pull more doe tags back. Why they'll have more hunting opportunities or they'll pull hunting opportunities
and
back.
So, like, example of what you're saying here, Dan, I would assume the reason they don't say gun season's open, hap at it, is because they want to limit the number of deer that are getting killed, right?
No, I don't think that's the case, because as a manager, they shouldn't care how those deer get killed.
Well, not how they get killed, but the number they get, because the longer.
No, I think the reason why they do it, Jared, is because of hunters, because it's something that has been patch quilt together over 70 years.
Yes.
That bow hunters got used to having September, October, November
to themselves
until gun hunters got it.
Right.
And that's why. It's not because, and some people will argue, well, it's not safe to have gun hunters out there in September.
Why?
They do it in other places.
Yeah.
Other places are hunting with guns.
Keep in mind here, guys, the management of a deer herd is relatively easy. The management of the people, the hunter, is the most difficult part of any deer management program, regardless of state.
Sure.
Because
I'd ring it.
There you go. Because of the stakeholders involved.
Well, that's why I think publishing the goal is so important. Because, like, if the state would say it's our goal,
they do. Pennsylvania will say, like this year, in most
are they achieving
counties, they don't
know. What's the problem?
Case in point, we had Matt Moret from Pennsylvania here with us, Dan, several months back, right?
Cool guy. Yep.
Great guy.
Very good guy.
Matt, when we grilled Matt on, hey, Sunday hunting, right? Seems like a no-brainer. We've been fighting this forever because of people, stakeholders against the hunting on Sundays. Some being hunters, some being farmers, whatever. Matt, when we asked Matt, hey, Matt, like, do you think next year we'll open this up? They won't evaluate it for 3 years.
Stupid. I agree.
3 years. They will not evaluate or give you an answer of, is it killing more deer? Is it having a detrimental effect? Is it having a positive? For 3 years. And I get it. It's sample size. They don't want to take, especially in the case of a 2020 when it was a COVID pandemic and everybody was outdoors and everybody was hunting more, they don't want to use 1 year to base the data. That said, and this is a flaw of many agencies, you have to communicate with us. You have to tell me what happened in 2020, regardless of the pandemic and regardless of Sundays being open, a few Sundays being open. What happened? I don't know. Like, how many deer were checked in on Sundays? No idea. They're not telling us. That's crazy. It's my money.
That's only going to hurt them in the long run, though, because people.
It's already hurt them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already hurt them.
And I understand there definitely is a huge human element to that. That's why Sunday hunting doesn't exist. That has nothing to do with deer numbers.
Nothing with deer management.
And I understand it's hard to step back from that once these rules have been put in place. I understand that.
Yeah, and they're not going to roll Sunday hunting back. It's just, when are you going to just open the season to me?
Well, and the less that they communicate those numbers, the more people are going to take it into their own hands and just hunt on Sundays. But that's fact.
Yeah. It's a ridiculous, archaic thing. The fact is, it was part of the Blue Law group, right? Which, is it New Hampshire? What's the other one? Or Vermont?
Is there one that still has...
Vermont or New Hampshire had blue laws as well. Same kind of thing.
A bunch of them did.
Yeah, 100 plus years old rule, which is why we couldn't buy alcohol on Sundays in Pennsylvania. Like, still state stores are closed for liquor and stuff, but you couldn't buy beer on a Sunday. Well, guess what? You can buy beer on a Sunday, but I can't hunt on a Sunday.
Yeah,
it's insane.
I get it. Yeah, it's just like voting when you're 18.
And again, it's the people, the stakeholder aspect of it, and it makes a deer manager's job, a deer biologist.
Well, and we're guilty
miserable.
of that too. I mean, I experience the benefits. Like, as a bow hunter, I love the fact that I get to hunt a long time, and I wish there was no gun season. That'd be great.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it very
through the
focused.
eyes of a dedicated
right.
bow hunter.
It makes sense, and like, so for somebody to propose that the gun season be way longer, selfishly, I would be like, well, I don't want that.
Yeah,
and so I understand why these agencies maybe have struggles with.
And that's exactly what, I mean, we are basically spoiled in the fact of what we've created that way.
Yeah.
But if just from a bow hunter's, I love bow hunting more than anything, but if I look at it rationally from a statistics number, without gun hunters, this doesn't happen.
Sure. Can't kill enough, right?
Is what drives this.
Well, and that's where your success rates.
Fun of gun hunters all they want, but gun hunters are what are bringing us to the table.
So if you look
as far as achieving herd numbers,
yes,
okay,
yes.
And really in revenue too. I mean,
take revenue, deer numbers, keeping deer hunters in deer hunting in check. I mean, you're killing a couple 100,000 deer with firearms every year, as opposed to a state that's maybe killing 50 or 60,000 with bows. And most of those are bucks.
And about a quarter of your hunters in Pennsylvania are bow hunters. The other 3/4 are gun guys who fund these agencies.
So it seems like there was at least a thought of, hey, we want to achieve a certain herd goal based on us setting this gun season length to whatever it is, a week or
some
two.
Success rate that we expect to happen.
Because if it was purely based on gun hunters wanting to hunt, it'd be wide open. There'd be no season. It would just be go hunt.
Correct. So it's number of hunters, the success rate of those hunters, the time that they can hunt, and then
formula
that gives me my number
desired goal
harvest.
Yeah.
Desired harvest. And then that's in check with, do I want the herd to increase in the area, stabilize, or decrease? That's all it is.
And so, Dan, does that make sense? Like, or do you disagree with that? Or
no, that's 100%. 100% correct with what Jeremy just said.
From a biological standpoint, from a management
standpoint. And see, I look at it both ways. I look at it, and I'm different. I'm kind of weird. I look at it, number one, from the biological standpoint. What is in most states do have a good handle on how many deer they should have. How they achieve it, that's up open for debate.
Agree.
The second thing is, I love bow hunting more than anything. But for me, just in my, not even just what I do for a job, just as I want deer hunters.
Sure.
I see, we are shrinking as a society for deer hunters. I don't care. If a guy kills a buck that I've been following, I don't care. You know what? Congratulations. It doesn't bother me. And I know it bothers some guys. They're like, well, that's all they want to do.
Yeah, it bothers me.
For me, it's like, I want that community. I want to have as many deer hunters as possible. And as far as I argue with people. I just had an argument with a guy today. I actually sent him off a little meme. He was ripping on me. I did a video saying, in my view, that crossbow hunting is bow hunting. I will argue with anybody about that. And he said, well, why do they call it a bolt? And I took out the dictionary definition. And I said, an arrow has a broadhead, a shaft, and a nock. And I showed him a picture of my Easton bolt. I said, it's an arrow. I don't care what you say. It kills a deer by hemorrhaging. If that's my dad, and this is near and dear to me, probably selfishly, because My dad in 1999, he never bow hunted in his life. He came hunting by me, shot his biggest buck with a gun, went home, found out he had colon cancer, had his entire rectum removed. And that year we bought him a crossbow, and he's still going. He's 86 years old.
That's awesome.
And he's killed a deer every single September with that crossbow. And people say, well, yeah, that should be got for guys like that. I said, no, what makes him special? Just because he had cancer? No, if it's a kid or if it's a guy who works and doesn't have time, he should be able to do that. But for me, this is going back to my point, is I want to have as many hunters out there as possible. And for the most part, it will sort itself out. If you're a big buck hunter, you're going to find places to go. I don't doubt that one whatsoever. You're going to find places where you can hunt. If there's a guy who wants to hunt with a crossbow on public land, he's going to find places to hunt, and it's just going to be it's going to be that much better. But I look at it from those three perspectives. Number one, as many hunters as possible. Number two, managing the herd responsibly to goal, which we haven't done here in my state for years.
And Dan, is when you say your state in Wisconsin, is that a call it a opportunity or catch per unit effort state? Basically, give me as many chances to kill a deer as possible.
Can you say that again?
So in Wisconsin, so I know like Pennsylvania, it's an opportunistic state, right? They're not looking to necessarily grow big bucks in Pennsylvania, right? They just want to provide as many opportunities to harvest a deer as possible. Would that be equivalent to what you would say in Wisconsin as well?
Yeah, Wisconsin's a little bit different because it's the northern part of the state, yes, would be like that, because that is that national forest that you talk about. I think we've got 3 million acres of old growth forest up there. So basically grow as many deer as we can. You get down to western Wisconsin, Buffalo County, even over here, you're getting into a little bit more of the, not so much the opportunity, but trying to grow bigger deer. Yeah.
But is that a state goal though?
No, that's another viewpoint of mine is I'd rather leave that to landowners, because in the end it's gonna come down to landowners. You try to do that on state land, good luck.
Well, I guess that's kind of my challenge to. I'm sure there's no deer coordinators listening. That maybe.
What is a deer coordinator?
Whoever runs or manages the deer program for the state.
Oh, we gotta get some of those people.
I know a bunch of them, and so here would be my challenge to them. First of all, how much of your state is privately owned, right, versus public? That's a big piece of it. If your state is 60, 70, 80% privately owned, how can you apply a public land management goal to the state? You can't.
100%. 100%.
Can't do it. It's privately controlled. You have to look at it. It goes back to, how are you guys managing there in Wisconsin? Like, we have wildlife management units. Are you county based still, or?
They did regions now. It's like, it takes up mostly counties though. I mean, like whole counties, and it's not split up like it used to be.
Well, and so there's again, case in point, government line, right? Is no physical barrier, right? It's a region that we come up with. You have to manage on a smaller level than that. You can't just say, well, here's this 8-county area that I'm going to say we need to decrease deer herds. No, can't do it.
I mean, I think to have any of these conversations.
Unfortunately, here we can't do that, Jeremy, because they canned 500 people out of that department.
I know. That's what I'm saying.
There has to be an acknowledgement of like these agencies are managing at scale. It's not.
It is. They're managing at landscape level. They won't argue that.
Yeah, and we as hunters have to be. At least acknowledge it, if not be okay with it.
But if you...
Not saying it's right.
Here's a perfect example. For your property, Jared,
yeah,
you're managing at a landscape level as the Ohio DNR, right? Okay. How many deer can you personally kill on that property right now with your tag that you buy?
I'm me?
Yeah.
Well,
how many
6 total? Because I'm in 2 counties.
And it costs you how much?
5 or 6?
Per doe tag.
Oh, it's like, 2 something for a license and $76 at either sex tag.
They are not managing your property like it needs to be managed.
Sure.
Because that's what I'm getting at. I'm not saying that they need to manage your property, but they're not giving you the flexibility as a landowner to accurately manage your property without spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on doe tags. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Just tell me, give me the flexibility.
I agree.
If you would say,
you
hey,
gotta
Jared,
get creative.
you can shoot up to 6 does on this tag. If I don't think my property can sustain 6 doe harvests, I don't do it.
Well, there are ways around it though. I can bring in other hunters.
Yeah, but that's not.
I can get red tags.
It's
it's not what I want to do, but
at what point do you give the individual landowner the opportunity to do what they feel is right on their property?
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know.
No, what you guys have touched on there is something Jared, what you said is I beat my head against the wall every day on that is, okay, so from like what you said, Jeremy, the state is coming in from a region.
Yep.
Saying this is how many deer we need to take out. Now with my license, I pay, I buy the patron's license, but if you bought it individually, if you bought a gun license and a bow license, I think it would cost you $26 a piece. And with that, you get a buck tag for each. And I think it's 2 doe tags for free. So you get that. Wow. And then I think you can buy doe tags after that. But what I can't get through people's heads is they don't understand that, well, I've got 6 tags. I can't kill 6. No, you can't kill 6 deer off your 10 acres.
Yeah, you don't have to.
You don't have, and you, and like you, but what one of you guys said, you have to take it upon yourself.
Yes.
To educate yourself on that.
Yes.
Because you can't expect the state to do that for you.
No.
But on the flip side, now, if you're a bigger landowner and you've got 1,000 acres of some of this prime stuff, and you're giving me 2 doe tags, like you said, well, either I know that in some areas we have DMAP and stuff like that.
It's still tough. It's not easy.
Yeah, it should be much easier.
Yeah.
It should be much easier, and it should be much more, much less complicated.
That's where I'm at in Pennsylvania, in that like I can kill 1 buck, period. Bow, gun, everything. 1 buck, which I'm not opposed to. I like that. I can buy doe tags, right? But frankly, usually in my unit, I get 1 doe tag and they're sold out. Then I have to go through the DMAP process, which fortunately the property I hunt is enrolled, and it's a little bit easier to get those tags. But if I wanted to also...
So what's your problem with that?
Because I want to kill some does on my property too. It's small, but there's so many of them. I have 1 doe tag to use basically, and then I have to try to get a DMAP tag basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like you have your own personal goals, as do I, and the state has their goals, which...
But if the state is 60, 70, 80% private land controlled, do those state
I agree with what you said there. No,
that's where I'm getting at, and it's an evolution process.
But at that point, you have to have some like acknowledgement, like I said, of they're managing it. It's not perfect.
Well, and that's where I'm saying is, are some states like Dan? Frankly, Wisconsin sounds pretty flexible there. I mean, the fact that you could kill 2 bucks and 4 does or something like that on 2 general tags is pretty flexible. Pennsylvania is not. I don't think Ohio is either. Ohio's
a 1 buck state, and I think it's a 5 or 6 deer state,
depending on where you're at.
So I can get 2 or 3 either sex tags per.
But as a non-resident,
county.
we have to still buy more tags, buy more doe tags. They don't come with the license.
I think a resident.
Let me ask you guys
too.
that question. Let me get, because I just had this in Wyoming. They have tons and tons of deer in Northeast Wyoming. I love it. It's one of my favorite places to hunt. But to go get a doe tag, it was like $77.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nah, forget it.
No. Yeah.
But why aren't states coming along and saying, if you're non-resident and you're a state with ample deer,
yes,
why would you even put me in that position? Why wouldn't you just give me a couple free tags with my license?
I would assume it's monetary. It's revenue. You know,
but they're certainly, I don't know if they're achieving their goals, but I mean, I would think that is one that, but that is all over the place. And now you come to Wisconsin, you can, how many you want? You know?
Listen, I'm sorry, this is a little off what we're talking about here, but it popped in my head. I would love for somebody to comment and correct me on this, or, tell me if I'm right or wrong. Mm-hmm. There is a regulation they passed in Ohio, either this past year or the year before, that says pretty loosely, a landowner and his sons and daughters need not buy a hunting license to hunt their land.
Really?
And so
on deer?
I'm sorry?
On deer?
Yeah. And so I interpret that as, and I don't think I'm stretching the rules here. I think I can go hunt my place.
And just not buy tags.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of landowner, certain states have landowner tags that are free.
Do you know about that? You're from Ohio.
I think Missouri might be one of those, Dan, where there's a landowner, you can buy a landowner tag and it's $0. You buy the tag.
I wasn't aware of that. Like here you can hunt other stuff. Like I can hunt rabbits and squirrels and coyotes on my property if it's my property.
Without having a license?
Without a license. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can, but I can't, oh wait, no, you have to have a small game license.
Yeah, see, that's what, and same with Pennsylvania. But I know that
you have to have a small game license. But I can hunt them on my own property year round.
Interesting.
But deer, no.
Yeah, because I mean, deer's the revenue driver. Right? We just got over this thing.
And I get that. That's fine because 90% or whatever the ridiculous percent of that's all being wildlife conservation is being funded by us. I'm totally fine with that.
Yes.
I'm not worried about that.
I'd pay more. I'd pay more to help out the community and to do better things with habitat and things like that. If Pennsylvania came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to charge you $50 more next year as a resident," I'm like, "Cool."
It's an interesting. I think if we keep going back and forth between like, well, I want to shoot more deer on my property, but we also want like more hunters would be like an adjacent goal. It's like, it seems like you can't have it both ways. You can't do what you want to do on your property and also have the state or your region succeed.
And fully keep in mind here that the model that this country is based off of is the North American wildlife model, right? Which is that I don't own the deer. Right? The deer is a public resource. I own the land, right? And I can manage the land, and I'm countering myself, being hypocritical here, in that when I say, hey, I want to have the control to do what I want with those deer, they aren't my deer. Right? They're on my property, right? Or my lease or whatever it is, but they're not my deer. So the state saying, hey, listen, this is the amount you have to abide by is in theory correct, because that is how this country manages wildlife. We do not privatize wildlife. That's a whole different subject and rabbit hole we can go down. So by law and by theory, like they're doing it right by giving me a landscape level harvest structure.
Yep.
I'm just saying that model has been in place for many, many, many decades. And because of the way privatization has happened of land and therefore management of wildlife, we may need to change some things.
How would you change it?
I would give more control to the landowner to manage the resource. I'm not saying full control, but more flexibility. To Dan's point, I could give you 6 tags, but that doesn't mean that you have to use all of them. If you choose to use all of them, that's where it gets gray.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If you use all of them, you're going to have fewer deer, and then if you
100%, which is
somehow has fewer deer, then they reallocate next time. But which is one thing I wanted to add to you, Jeremy, because this is a many-pronged, layered onion.
It's the blooming onion,
like onions.
When you talk about the North American wildlife model, that's why I have always been vehemently opposed to state-mandated antler restrictions.
There you go.
Because, like, if you want to do it on your property and you can convince your neighbors to do it on their property, that's your prerogative. Yeah. But you don't own those deer. And if my dad or my brother or my uncle wants to shoot a forkhorn, God bless them, let them shoot that forkhorn.
I know, man.
They shouldn't feel bad. Like, well, now it's like, that's why we don't go fishing anymore. I mean, now it's like, how big does it have to be?
Yeah.
Oh, it can't be 20 inches, but it can be 19.
Slot limits.
Yeah. And it's, or like the trophy, like we used to actually, this probably sounds really bad, but when we used to go northern pike fishing, if we caught a muskie that was legal size, we'd keep it. It tastes just like a northern.
Yeah.
And oh my God, if you want to insult somebody, you tell them that you filleted a muskie.
Oh, they'll crucify you.
But there it's like, no, it's got to be 52 inches. Like, forget it. I'm not throwing my shoulder out for a day to catch fish. I'm throwing back.
Yeah.
So, that's in addition to what you're saying.
But there's
definitely
there, right?
There's definitely politics involved. The fact that
100%.
The fact that like an archery season lasts so long and a gun season lasts so long, there has to be some input from somebody lobbying to say, like, listen, it's a shared resource. We want this piece of
most of it.
And somebody saying, okay, I see that.
Most of that is biologically driven. Season lengths are driven by success versus number of hunters to a output of possible
but
harvest.
When you start talking like antler restrictions and stuff, that has to be motivated by, hey, these hunters are telling us, or we're surveying somehow that they want to see bigger deer, and this is the best way we can figure to do that.
Well,
right?
Yes, and that there is research that says, per even like a Ozaga on the female side, that there should be a healthier age structure in the population, meaning all of the bucks of the population shouldn't be mostly 1.5-year-olds. They'll be the larger majority of the population because it's just the way that this thing goes through the loops.
So is this how it happens or not? In my opinion, the thought process of these agencies should be, okay, the best thing for these deer herds to see maximum yields or health or benefits is this.
Okay, pause there, though.
All right.
Because in theory, we would be talking about deer herds and what's best for them. Not all states, especially this one we're sitting in Pennsylvania, manages based on the deer herd. They manage based on the habitat. What is the number of deer that should be in an area that is not detrimental to the native habitat? That is the priority number one.
All right. Well, as long as there's transparency on the goal, that's what I said earlier. Like, tell us what you're trying to do so we can understand. So then from there, do they say, whether it's, I don't know, survey or something?
It's models.
All right, hunters, how do we want to achieve this?
No.
Okay.
There is very little input from our hunting demographic.
Well, whether it's input or their perception of how we should do it.
By the numbers.
Yeah, but they don't just like...
They say, okay, in this area, we need to lessen the population because we're seeing too much browsing or whatever, not enough forest regeneration.
Okay, so in that situation, how do they decide between elongating the gun season or elongating the bow season?
They don't.
So do black and white.
They really, well, it's, if I need to reduce the herd, I need to harvest more deer. How do I do that? Most of the time in the state of Pennsylvania,
that's what I'm saying.
It's give more doe tags.
Why?
Versus lengthening
just elongate
seasons,
the season.
Because the Game Commission doesn't control the seasons. The state legislator does.
Oh, okay.
Mind blown, right? I mean, this is
so
where
they have jurisdiction they can work within,
but they can allocate more doe tags because they control that.
Okay.
That's messed up.
Yeah.
Pennsylvania just got problems. I've always known that.
I've been in it, man. If I had a chance, and I've tried and I'm in discussion with some of it on the boat side, but I would love to have a seat on our commission board. And I know a lot of people would say that, and maybe some wouldn't. Maybe would say, like, I don't want to touch that with 10-foot. I would love to have a seat on that commission board because I think that they need a voice who's not just going through the motions. They need somebody who says, guys, can we question what we've been doing for 3 decades for a second? Because this doesn't seem right.
Who's on it? Is it, how many people are on that?
6 or 7.
Do we know any of them?
No. Most of them do not have a background in this arena. Most of them are retired and older.
Okay.
I'm trying not to offend anyone. I don't know how else to describe
Saying
it.
they're idiots?
No. No, I'm not saying that. No, I think that, I mean, it's the commission.
They're just out of touch.
The commission can just do, well, I don't even know if it's out of touch.
And that's who's making the decisions in PA?
They are
the commission.
The board
Game Commission.
Yeah, so the Game Commission biologists would bring a decision to the commissioners. The commissioners are who approve season limits, dates, etc. But if you change a serious structure, for example, Sunday hunting cannot be changed.
Okay, so that's who you would lobby then. Yeah, within their jurisdiction, you can say, listen, bow hunting needs to be this or whatever.
And they still have to then go to the PA state legislature for approval on most significant changes, Sunday hunting being one of them. If you talk to the Pennsylvania Game Commission right now and say, guys, why don't I have Sunday hunting? They say, we support it. Well, why don't I have it? Talk to your state legislator. That is the exact verbiage that you
So
will get.
ultimately, it is just straight politics. At the end of the day, it's like...
It's people.
So those state politics are saying whatever goals they have. Is this bringing the state money?
Hey, Farmer Joe, do you want Sunday hunting? No, we're against it.
Yep. I see.
That's what it is. And it's stakeholders. And I get all the stakeholders involved.
Which, in theory,
right?
I get it.
And we could go down to...
Because hunters are not the only party either.
100%.
A farmer should have a say.
Farmers should have a say. Yep. The outdoor recreationalists should have a say.
Yeah. This conversation has given me an interesting perspective on like the individual landowner versus a region or statewide goal.
I will say this, I am not in favor of privatization of wildlife. That is not what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But the flexibility
it's not possible.
It's not. The flexibility of a landowner to be able to manage the resource as per his or her property.
I see that.
That is the limiting factor right now, and we just haven't revised it in this country.
So how do you tie, because it seems like your argument for that is based on the privatization of a land. At one time, these rules and regulations were ruled out and they made sense because most land was public that was being hunted, right? Now, a majority of this land has been private, but the wildlife that lives there still is not. So how do you give that flexibility without a whole privatization of wildlife?
Go ahead, Dan.
That's why we have all this weird stuff that we have.
Yeah.
That's why it's.
That's an unanswered question. Then
well, it's also why Dan pulls up regulations from a state he's hunting in, and it's 17 pages long.
Sure, it's
17 pages long. It's I don't know. I mean, that's something I've been trying to figure out myself. It's like, I get that people want different things. Here we have I'm not going to get into the minutiae, but here we have a weird thing called the Conservation Congress. And basically that's where any citizen can show up in April and voice their opinions on or they can propose changes to game regulations. And so it kind of empowers the people, but at the same time, it makes the DNR's job a lot harder to do, because you got guys coming in there. It's always special interest groups. It's the muskie fishing guys. It's the walleye fishing guys. It's the deer hunters saying, well, here south of Highway 64, we want to have, a 26-inch size limit on pike. We want to have, and some people have tried to float antler restrictions around here. And it's like you said, you got two separate things. You've got if you draw, sorry that I keep talking about my state, but if you draw a line to the middle and go south, it's 90% private. So, basically the state should just be setting the regulations, and hunters should just relax and work within their confines to do it.
So I agree, Dan, by the way. Per Jared's comment on the landowner, Ohio resident landowners, spouses, and their children are not required to have a hunting license, fur taker permit, either sex deer permit, antlerless deer permit, spring or fall turkey permit, or Ohio wetland stamp when hunting or trapping their own land. Okay. Number 2, this is even more interesting because I'm looking at this. A non-resident landowner and spouse and children living with that landowner may hunt on the property without a license, either deer sex permit, antlerless permit, spring or fall turkey permit, Ohio wetlands habitat, or fur taker permit if the non-resident's home state allows residents of Ohio owning property in the non-resident's home state. How freaking confusing is this? So basically,
wait, read the last part again.
What they're saying, I'll summarize it because this is just trash, is I can hunt, if I buy land in Ohio, I can hunt
as long as
Ohio residents can hunt in Pennsylvania if they own land without a license. It's a reciprocation law.
Do they?
I'm moving to one of those states because I didn't realize. No,
yeah.
So I don't know. Strauss, maybe find my PA one. I don't think it is. I don't think that non-resident.
Is that like a hunting reciprocity? Is there a list?
It's ridiculous. I want to throw my phone against the wall right now.
I've never even heard of that before. I didn't even know there were states that if you owned land, you could hunt without buying land.
So in your case,
I could go hunt my farm.
No, because you don't live with your parents.
So you can shoot
ducks to live with them?
Yep.
On private land in Ohio if you own the land?
Without any tags.
No federal waterfowl stamp?
It's I bet federal you still have to buy. You just don't have to buy the Ohio wetland stamp, the state-based one.
That's pretty crazy.
I mean, wow. And I think any migratory birds.
To your point, it's just like that's just one example.
One example.
One example of a million.
And the resident one is pretty easy, right?
I don't see that part, Jeremy, about me having to live with them.
It doesn't? Oh, maybe it was just the non-resident
Ohio resident landowners, spouses, and their children, of which I am.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Are not required to have a hunting license.
So you could hunt it without tags.
Antlers, or Ohio wetland stamp when hunting or trapping on land they own.
Yep. So you could hunt your parents' property without tags.
Yeah.
It's the non-resident in which the children have to live with the landowner.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway is there, if you don't have the reciprocal
children living with,
which is crazy. So that means if I buy land in Ohio and Ohio people owning land in Pennsylvania,
as long as Harlan and Carter live with you.
Well, and if as long as Ohio people can hunt Pennsylvania land they own without a tag, which who in Ohio buys land in Pennsylvania first off? But that said, then I could hunt. That is the stupidest. Why make it so complicated?
So what you just need to do is have your kids move to other states.
Apparently.
You know, and then you could hunt like 3 or 4 states without buying any tags.
That's insane.
Where we get reciprocity with Iowa?
No. I'm good fine, Strauss.
I was not giving reciprocity to nobody.
Thus, big bucks. I mean,
good fine.
We can always. It's frustrating to me.
Did you buy a tag and now wish you hadn't? Yeah.
It's just frustrating to me because, again, like, I get it to a point, but why make it so difficult? Why make it so? Why not just leave it just like an Ohio resident? Because, I mean, what's the difference between me living in Pennsylvania and owning land in Ohio and the guy living in Ohio that owns land in Ohio? There's no difference. We both own land.
Yeah, just say landowner.
I mean, it seems like anything. I mean, it's not just hunting that this like over-regulation exists. You're breaking a rule. What's that called? There's a term for breaking a law at any given time.
Martial law?
No. You know what I'm saying? Like the chances of you breaking a law at any given time are great because they're so conflicting. And
that ends up being one of, I think, the hardest parts. Like, I believe that there are a lot of, let's say, illegal hunting acts committed in this country every year because, frankly, it's too confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Dan, what is I haven't been there in a while. I think it's Mississippi that essentially now you can bait in Mississippi, but the bait site has to be like out of view.
100 yards.
100 yards.
It has to be 100 yards or out of view. I thought that was Alabama.
Is it Alabama?
100 yards are out of view?
Yeah.
What if I just cover it?
There we go.
I can't see it. It's under that thing.
You know? Same with Pennsylvania on a mineral side. I can use mineral in the off season, but essentially during the season, 30 days before I have to stop, and I need to dig that site and move it, which I just like throw it somewhere. Like,
see, in that sense, I'm very much in agreement with Dan that like there should be some common sense allowed for me to say, all right, this is how I'm going to do this. Because when you get into this crazy interpretation of all these laws, it's like nobody can follow them.
It's super frustrating.
But there should be some regulation. Obviously,
there should be regulations. They should be more. You could streamline this and put it in a small packet. In every state, you know, I used the one example once, and then somebody kind of took me to town on it. I said, it's no different than speeding laws. Well, yeah, but I can drive 70 here, and you can't. Okay, yeah, I understand that, but for the most part, laws, you know, are pretty standard.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that there's some wrinkles in some other states, but it's. You go to another state and you're almost like, especially for me, I'm like, I don't even want to go hunting because am I legit here? Well, did you read the regs? Yeah, I did, but
kind of.
You know, can I use this broadhead? Can I use or some of them have like draw weight restrictions, like 40 pounds. It's like I know people who can kill deer with 30-pound draws. Some of that stuff just needs to be cleaned up.
Dan, to your knowledge, and mainly because I didn't hunt out of state growing up, but let's say in the 90s, you know, and I guess 80s too, were there complex hunting regulations like this through the country, or is this more recent with, I don't know, deer populations?
There was always some level there, but I think a lot of them got more detailed, and some of them are just... I know, especially like in the South, some of them are just arbitrary by whoever happens to be in charge. Like one of the states, and one of your viewers will correct me, I thought it was Alabama, you can't use turkey decoys. Why not? Because the commissioner didn't think that was fair.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
You know, what?
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, just like the reaping thing, like there's a lot of states that you're not allowed to reap a turkey in.
Yeah. I mean, now is that a safety thing, or is it is somebody's judgment off of what chase is supposed to be? I don't know. But if it's based off of an ethical standard, well, that can be interpreted. You know, the baiting one that can be interpreted. Yeah. I'll go toe to toe again with. I mean, I love all my deer hunting brethren, but putting a kill plot in the woods is baiting. I'm sorry, it is. I've got a 1/8-acre plot of turnips in there, and the only reason I'm sitting there is because there's turnips in there.
Yeah.
But if I take a pail full of shelled corn out in the national forest, oh my God, you're busted.
I think that's a good point because we've had this discussion a lot, and frankly, I think Jared and I are at least in agreement that if Ohio baiting during the hunting season at least was outlawed, that state would be the #1 big buck state in the country.
See, and I bet, well, he might not disagree with that, but I bet Dan would, I don't put words in your mouth, Dan, but I bet you would say like, hey, let hunters, if they want to bait, if not, don't do it, you know. And
I agree with that. I agree with, because like I said, because some people on the biologist side will say, well, Dan, you know, you got to understand disease transmission. I said, oh, please educate me on disease transmission. When anybody who knows anything about deer, if you've got turnips, that turnip that's as big as my fist is probably got 5 deer's mouth on it before it's eaten.
100%.
One picks it up, eats it, drops it. One picks it up, eats it, and drops it. So let's not have that conversation.
Yes.
Back to your point, Jared, you know, if you want to, I understand it's frustrating. I hunted national forest for 30 years. When people baited, it's like, okay, you might see a deer opening day, and then after that, all the bucks are nocturnal. But you know what? It's public land. I don't own it. And if that's how some guy wants to hunt, you know, yeah, you got to have restrictions. You can't take a gravity box out there. But I think that if that's how a guy wants to hunt, if a guy wants to hunt big bucks, he's certainly not hunting over a bait pile, because you're not killing them that way. You know, you got to know something about deer.
That's not always true. I mean, guys are killing. I'm not one of them. I can't do it, but I know some guys that are killing bucks over bait.
I think a lot of it's
I'm not saying it can't be done.
Late.
I'm not saying it can't be done. I mean, especially some of those guys that I know, guys that are, you know, that's all they live for.
Seems to correlate with pressure. Done. Like higher pressure states, it's harder to kill bucks over bait. But you got to Kansas. I mean, that's what.
Yeah, I can kill deer over corn.
I did want to. I thought your question was an interesting one, or your point about non-resident hunting, because I think that's kind of a. I think that's kind of a newer thing. Like
people going
hunting
across state lines.
And so if I can cut the states some slack, like at one time, there probably wasn't a lot of communication. It was just like, hey, this is Nebraska. This is how we do it here. And then at some point, people started like coming to Nebraska to hunt. And they're like, oh, well, we need to make sure that this is taken care of and this and that.
Well, especially the land purchase side. Like how many people own land in a state that they were not a primary
and so
resident.
It's hard to backtrack and apply a regulation across all states that at one time was only mattered to people who lived there and hunted there.
Again, to that point, we got to evolve.
Sure, agreed. Yes.
Like this is the new reality. There are, I mean, how many people in Iowa, or how many blocks of timber in Iowa are now owned by a non-resident versus resident?
Sure.
Proportionally, it's got to be substantially different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, agreed.
Same with Illinois, same with Ohio, same with Kentucky. Like all of these states, the parcel size may have changed a little bit, but in terms of proportion of people owning land who are residents versus non-residents, that has become skewed a lot more. You know, it's not, I'm sure it's not even 70-30, but it could be 80-20. Yeah. You know,
again, I'm sure I'm oversimplifying, but you should just, you know, these factors are changing. Land ownership changes, you know, weapon technology, all these things are changing. Every year, the state agency should be able to go back to their model and say, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to, you know, have this amount of revenue and do this with the deer herd. Therefore, here are the regulations.
Yeah, and I think the segmentation.
And again, though, to what I was saying earlier, and you're saying this doesn't happen, at that point, you know, maybe there is some opportunity for the agency to say, all right,
public opinion.
Here's what we want to do. How do we want to do it? Here's the regulations in place. It's not a total overhaul. It's like, how should we update how do we update?
Yeah. And the fact is, because states are based on models, no knock to them, regulations don't change very often. Significant regulations.
They should be based on models, but the factors need to be accounted for.
Yeah.
Right? There has to be some methodology.
Yeah. It's a tough thing, and I get it. Every state's a little different. You know, Pennsylvania is managing based on habitat quality. That's what they focus on, not deer herd. It's the habitat is the primary focus, and then how the deer needs to be managed in check with that is different. Whereas other states are very deer herd centric. They are managing for the herd, whether it's a reduction in herd because they think there's too many deer in an area, or it's disease, or we're trying to manage for bigger bucks, like whatever. It's not standard, and I don't think I'm not saying it always has to be standard, but it seems like a core factor there is like, okay, well, why is Pennsylvania managing for habitat, but Wisconsin or Michigan is not? Doesn't make any sense.
Agreed.
You know, so anyways, that's a big rabbit hole we've gone down. I think we came back out the other side.
You guys want to talk about CWD?
Oh.
What?
I have to get some work done today. So I was
We've got some time left. There's other stuff I want to talk about too. I want to talk about the rut predictions at some point too. I am curious, just because.
Let's tangent this before we go into rut and stuff. This podcast should drop at or right before most of the states' major deer gun seasons. Okay. Which, Dan, yours is. Are you the 13th this year or something? Is it second Saturday?
We are the 20th. The 20th.
Okay. So, that would be the tailing portion, I would say, of the Wisconsin rut.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Kentucky's the 13th this year.
Gun
season. Kentucky's the 13th. Indiana's the 13th. Pennsylvania's always, well, now it's Saturday after Thanksgiving. But two things I'd like to talk about is, number one, opinions on gun hunting in like the middle part of November there. Because there's a lot of people we talked to. Was it Sean Luchtel from Heartland Bow Hunter?
Mm-hmm.
Missouri's is also, I think, the 13th. So you put in gun rifle, and in a state like Missouri where you got 500,000 deer hunters, right in the middle of the rut. And for a lot of people, they love it because it's some great hunting. But to a lot of people, they're also like, man, I wish this was in December. So I'm not essentially having like every buck in the world chasing during peak gun season.
I mean, it's bow hunters that are saying that, or any deer hunter that's not a gun hunter.
Good point.
Maybe not all, but most.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's it. It just comes down to it's a limited resource that all hunters, are advocating for or are, wanting to take advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's human nature for a group doing it one way to be selfish and say, I want to have restrictions on this other group.
For sure.
I mean, that's why.
I mean,
I can relate to that as a bow hunter. My passion is I like to bow hunt, and that's just me. And I know other people like to gun hunt. That's great, awesome. Selfishly, I'd love for their opportunities to be squandered so that mine can flourish. That's just human nature, But I want people to have opportunities too. So, I'm on board with how it is.
I think a big piece that's kind of taken a back seat, but still should be acknowledged in those gun seasons is tradition, right? We talk about deer camp traditions, especially in some of these bigger states, which I know is fading. Unfortunately, that's a heartbreaker for me. But there's a tradition that's been overlaid, and honestly, even though it was more opportunity, especially for my kids, to hunt Saturday and Sunday now, right after Thanksgiving for Pennsylvania, when they changed that tradition and from being the Monday after, it broke deer camps across this state because we would go up Friday after Thanksgiving. We would small game hunt Friday and Saturday. Sunday would be, we couldn't hunt. We'd prep guns, shoot guns, watch football games. And then Monday we would hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And that tradition was crushed by opening it up on Saturday and Sunday. Now, I'm not opposed to it because it gave myself and my kids more opportunities, but I feel like in a lot of states we've thrown the traditions out the door, which, to the stump sitter's point, kind of was the rooted start of all of this.
Yeah, this right behind me, that was the start of all this, and everything what you mentioned. But like you said before, Jeremy, life is about change.
Yep.
Unfortunately for deer managers, it had to change. Like here, it was tradition. Schools closed down that week of Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was closed. Everybody, we have a 9-day gun season. Everybody went gun hunting, and that's what it was. It was, Thanksgiving was spent at deer camp, and that tradition is pretty on its last legs in those northern forests. But it almost had to, and now when you look at it, had to change. And when you look at it now, there's guys going up and, okay, bow hunting, we didn't think about it. Now it's like I've shot 7 deer already. So it's like, it's like by the time you get to November, those diehard deer hunters, a lot of them, they're not doing deer camp.
Yeah.
It is a sad reality. But to your original point about gun hunting during the rut, there's some states, like you said, Missouri, Minnesota.
Yeah, Kentucky.
I think theirs starts on the
first
week of November.
Yeah, 13th or even the week before that.
think it's a week before.
Yeah, so like the 6th or 7th.
Got 2 weeks. But then if you go to some place like Texas, well, you can hunt with a gun in what, October, November?
Yes.
And their rut really isn't rocking until December, even January. Same in the South. So, I'm torn. I love bow hunting like you do, Jared. I love watching deer during the rut, but I think it's selfish not to allow gun hunters to experience that at some point during the season. And there are states, mine included, where you can't. By the time our gun season's here, the rut's done. I mean, those they're done.
Well, and Dan, admittedly selfish. Like, obviously, that's a selfish thing to say. Like, as a bow hunter, I want the most access to this resource. It is selfish for sure.
Yeah. Is there any changing it? I don't know. Probably not. I mean, and that goes back to the other side of tradition. Tradition is like, well, no, we're just going to leave the gun season where it is.
Right.
Because we tried to get a 16-day gun season here forever, but it would have been an extension of the gun season. And this goes back to the 80s. And people were screaming, I can't hunt 16 days. I'm like, nobody's asking you to hunt 16 days.
There you go. Yeah, make your own choices.
The whole selfish factor
what a funny
was
thing
like,
to say.
Somebody's going to be out there when I'm not out there. And that makes me, that makes me mad because I can't do it.
Yeah.
And those were gun hunters. So,
well, and that's just every hunter trying to make the most of their opportunities, whether it's the date range that they have or the weapon they're allowed to use. Like, that's,
I mean, there's a lot of hunters in this state who are against Sunday hunting. That they're just like,
what do you think the primary reason is?
Change.
Because they think it's going to kill more deer and they don't. Or is it just
change? I think mostly. In fact, and again, it's the way the world is. Some of these people who have access, not necessarily own or lease, but have access to private land. Those landowners have said, "I'm cool, but you're not hunting Sundays."
Okay.
And because they're one of the stakeholders who are opposed to it. And so again, it's this weird thing, like.
Which I get. Yeah, I mean, dude, all of this stuff, there's going to be other people. I can understand as a landowner, like, hey, I'd rather just have my property kind of to myself on Sunday. Like, you're cool to hunt, but that's our family day. I get it. I don't want that as a hunter.
Yeah, it's just, it's a tough spot. I mean, I think the one thing that I would love to see, and I don't know how to do it, and Dan, this is a discussion point, but I would love to see somehow bring back some of that tradition, even if it is around the opening day of gun season and stuff. And I say that mainly because, like, I look back on growing up. I think I went to deer camp the first time when I was 8. I couldn't hunt till I was 12 in Pennsylvania at that time. Like, I look forward to that year round because it was just a cool time. Like, I'm not saying you don't have to worry about big bucks and stuff, but the camaraderie aspect that you had during those 3, 4, 5 day time frames were some of my favorite memories of hunting. And maybe I didn't kill anything. Maybe I missed. Maybe I shot a spike. Like, it was one of those times where you could really just get back to your roots. And even now, as what I would consider an advanced hunter who really wants to shoot a mature buck in these areas.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Trying.
Advanced,
Attempting. Advanced compared to 13-year-old Jeremy. Let's put it that way. I still would be all for that. Maybe I am tagged out and I'm just a support person. Maybe I'm hunting and I don't even think about pulling the trigger because I'm just there to be part of it. But, like, there were so much things that I learned as a young kid growing up in a hunting community like that I'm trying really hard with my 2 boys. But it's just me and Emily, really, and my dad. And so it's, I had 17 guys that are around, and for sure there was a lot of corruption versus learning at a deer camp. But, like, that was part of being a kid growing up in a hunting family. And unfortunately, it's changed a lot. And I try to expect, like, we watch some of these old videos from the 80s and 90s, and man, it just takes me back to, like, such a cool place. And, like, to my kids, I think they're watching it thinking, like, we don't do that. Like, and that might have been fun, like, to be in a tent and it wasn't when it was 30 degrees and raining and miserable and, like, the fire would go out every 5 minutes. But, like, those were adventures that I grew up with that kind of formed me to who I am today as a hunter.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. Maybe more of a statement, but, like, I would encourage people to figure out a way to get creative. Frankly, we did it last year. We basically did a mini camp, and it was just the two boys and Emily and I, and we hunted our 30 acres behind the house. And I didn't even take a gun with me. You know, and I sat in a blind with the boys, and Emily went up to a tree stand at the back of the property, and we saw deer. We came back, we ate lunch. Like we made it a 2-day little mini deer camp. And Carter actually shot his first buck on that first Sunday, which again was me emotionally blown, because it was like, dude, like I've never been able to hunt a Sunday in my life. Like this is amazing. Like, and wow. You know, but they're talking about it now, even with Harlan shooting his buck last night. Like they're saying, hey, are we going to do this little deer camp again? I'm like, yeah, like absolutely. Like we do like whatever you guys want to do to make it special. And I say that mainly because obviously the three of us are so intense on deer hunting. We love it, but I encourage us as well as people listening to not forget about that part of the hunt, because I think it is so important to developing the next generation.
Yeah. Or even to me, like to just not take it so seriously is good words.
And it's hard, man, because we put a lot into it. We live it year round. I invest a lot of money into it, you know, and it is truly like I have a hobby. I fish, but my hobby is deer hunting and deer management. Mm-hmm. That's what it is. So yeah, it's hard not to take it so serious, but at the same time, man, some of those days that we just goofed off and, you know, let's go down a rabbit hole of deer drives. Like we put on deer drives like it was going out of style, and like people now would be like,
that's all we did back in the day.
Yeah, you're a piece of trash. It's like, no, like that's how I did it.
Sunday, and that's all we did. We deer drive in the national forest.
Yeah, and that's what, I mean, I knew when I was a 14-year-old kid, I could direct a 10-man deer drive because I lived in those woods, and I was like, yeah, this is how we're going to go. Here's where the posters need to be, and I know exactly where these deer are going to be, and I know exactly when we're going to bump them. And like, it was cool. And honestly, those walks through the woods, I saw more deer sign and learned more about how deer moved and what they did, and how I would walk by a big buck at 10 yards and he would just not move. Cause he's like, if I get up, I'm in trouble. But if I stay here, I'm probably good. And like, I don't know if we're losing that side of hunting in today's era.
Well, we are. I think we've lost it, because that's how I grew up the exact same way. And the way I grew up, like I said, was rabbit hunting. That's how I learned how to hunt. Mm-hmm. And squirrel hunting. And people laugh at me today. They say, oh, you shot squirrels. How hard is it to shoot a squirrel? I said, go hunt a hunted squirrel population, and then tell me what you do. Because until you've done that, and then we started deer hunting, and we did deer drives. But the deer camp was the coming of age for all of us. And it wasn't, I mean, it was primarily just the guys, but I know some girls that went through it. And it was families getting together, and the point that you brought up, Jared, was not stressing out about, or however you verbalize that.
Taking it less seriously, not taking ourselves as seriously.
This week, who I'm not going to tell you their name, they shot a 4-point buck this week with their bow, because they said, I got excited and I shot it, and it was and they didn't have anybody with them. And they said it was the happiest hunt they've had. And I said, that's what deer hunting is about.
Yeah.
It's about discovering that excitement. And especially if you can share it in a camp with somebody, just even like you said, most of our best memories were not hunting.
Yes.
It was the food we ate and the jokes that were told, and somebody fell down walking outside on the
Did you guys have any initiations for your camp?
No, we never did.
Oh man,
like that. I've been in camps where they've done stuff like that.
So none that Dan can speak on.
Our camp was really serious in this, and I think we're probably past the age. And I don't know. I'd love to bring it back, but we called it a snipe hunt, which there actually is a bird called a snipe, right? But we made up this fictitious like groundhog squirrel looking animal basically. And so it was usually the first or second night of camp. if you were new to camp, you would snipe hunt, right? And basically you would go with your dad or your uncle or whatever. He would hold a garbage bag.
Shine a flashlight in it.
Shine a flashlight. And people would be walking through the woods banging. You would be banging pots and pans. For whatever reason, snipe liked to come to the loud sound of pots and pans banging. Everybody else be walking through flashlight yelling, snipe, 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 snipe. And eventually, like, all of a sudden, like, whoever, your dad or whatever would fall on the ground and be like, oh, I got one, and you go to the fire and it'd end up being like a gallon of milk or whatever. And that was, but that moment, like, literally there's videos of us doing this. I can remember mine really clear. Like, that was like, hey, you're 12, or at that point you were 8 or 9, right? Hey, you're now a man of deer camp. You're part of this club. And like, that initiation, like, meant so much, because at first you're like, wait a minute, like, this isn't real. Like, what? I don't get it. Like, did I succeed? And they're like, no. Like, this is how you become part of this thing. And as a kid growing up, once you became part, because then the next thing was like your brother or your cousin or whoever came up, you had to build up the like anticipation for it, right? You had to like talk it up, like, yeah, I caught a 13-pounder. Like, that was a pretty freaking rare, But like, you just build it up because that was your initiation into deer camp, and you were now one of the guys. And like, again, to your point, Dan, you're right, and it reminiscing here a little bit, but like, man, what a miss on our hunting society now that we don't do that stuff. Like, just a complete blown opportunity to have that, because and again, blame social media and stuff, but like, are we, even though we're more connected today, are we really more disconnected at the same time?
I think we are.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and it's not just our industry; it's just people. You don't have the family get-togethers that you used to have, and it's
weird.
It's not in our culture as much. Like, you're just distanced because of social media for sure is the biggest culprit in that.
And I think there is a lot of pressure. I mean, no knock to this industry. I love it. I've lived in it for going on, I don't know, 15 plus years now. There's a lot of pressure on us. I feel it personally. Like, it's not that I make it my determining factor, but if I would go out and shoot a 2-year-old 8-point, there's pressure, and I know that I would, get some behind the back comments about it.
Well, that's my life. I get it all every day, so don't worry about that.
Well, and so like, and again, it's man, it's sad. Like, if that was what makes you happy, and that's hunting, and you did it by all legal methods, great. But like, yeah, it's a report. In fact, one of the things that we kind of made a decision on just recently from a hunter side is like, we're just not going to film our hunts. Like, if it happens and we have somebody with us in a tree and we get it on film and we get the kill, that's awesome. But we're not going to feel the pressure to film every hunt, because maybe it sucks a little of the joy out of why we do it. And that's just our decision that we made, and I think we're all pretty comfortable with it. And I think that, and I'm not saying like, do what makes you happy. In fact, I still will pass the 2-year-old 8-point, because like, I love watching that deer. Jared showed me a beautiful 3-year-old 10-point that was right under his stand in Ohio, and you just filmed it with your phone. And I bet that was an amazing experience. And maybe for somebody else, they're like, man, are you crazy for passing that deer? Right?
Yeah.
But it's what makes you happy.
Yeah, deer hunting is it's just complex. Like, there's so many different reasons that people do it. Like, I don't know.
How could we start something? And I say this when it's like an open discussion, Dan. Like, think about those stump sitters, right? And I know we faded this out a little bit, but like, there has to be other people like us talking about, like, man, you're right. Like,
everybody I talk to,
we should do this.
The same conversation.
Like, how do we get this camp life back? Like, how do we bring these traditions back? And again, I'm starting it with literally my wife and kids at our house, and like, it's not a change of setting. It's just we try to do different things for the opener. We're going to this year because we're going to be hunting in Illinois, and then I'm meeting the family in Kentucky. So we're going to have a deer camp in Kentucky this year, and maybe that's the start of it. But like, I also think like, man, like seriously, I had 14 or 15 guys in a camp. We didn't see each other that regularly, and like, we were around a fire, and like, it's like, man, it's gotta be like midnight. Oh, it's 7:30. Holy shit. Like, I don't know. What are we going to do before we get a bed? But that was like camp lifestyle, and I will say that on record, I'm going to figure out how to bring that back to my kids. I don't know how yet. I don't know what it will look like, but like they will experience that because I know how much I enjoyed it and how important it was in my life. Yeah. So I encourage anybody else, I guess, to figure out how to do that, how to bring it back, even if in a small one night before the opener at your own house, like make a camp, share it with us, share it with Dan and Deer Hunting. Tell us how you did a camp.
That's a great initiative, and we're gonna have to follow up on that.
Hashtag make a camp.
Hashtag
there you go.
pitch a tent.
Just done it. Done it.
So Dan, again, let's dovetail that back to the rut side. So, you know, and you said you kind of weren't too familiar with this, but like I know deer and deer hunting, and one, because I did some of the southern rut predictions.
We've been having a lot of moon conversations lately.
So the rut, your calendar, first of all, is, I think,
we have no dog in the fight either. Yeah. We don't know what we believe.
Is really good.
Neither do I, to be honest with you, but go ahead.
They can buy the calendar right now at what, shop.deeranddeerhunting.com?
Shop.deeranddeerhunting.com. And we've published it since 1992.
Wow.
Charlie Alsheimer was the driving force behind it. And I don't have time nor the inclination to go through the blow by blow of the whole premise of the calendar. But basically what the take home is it's not based off of moon phase. And that's what people think, like, oh, that you're selling moon phase. And number one, it's not that expensive. We don't make hardly any money off of it. It's just a pretty calendar with our rut predictions, which a lot of people find true. Basically, Charlie based it off of the second full moon after the autumnal equinox. And there's a lot of different factors, Jeremy, that go into it. But this wasn't his creation. This goes back to the Native Americans with the hunter's moon. Basically, there was thought then, before they even had pencils and paper, that there had to be some correlation between the timing of that moon and when the rut occurred. And what Charlie did is, when he studied it, and he wasn't a scientist, he's just a deer observationist, but basically he said there's something going on here. If you look at the 2 weeks after when that falls and how that lines up with the rut, he said it has to be something with, the gravitational pull, the extra daylight or the extra moonlight hitting the pineal gland, which is what we already know triggers hormone changes in those dates. And if you look at it, pretty dang accurate. I mean, like when people were mapping out their log books, they're like, this is pretty accurate. Now, I was actually looking before we got online here, what we put in for this year. And basically we have, this is all things being equal. So there's a million prefaces that we have to make here. What's the weather like? What's your buck to doe ratio? What's all these other things going on?
Yeah, all these assumptions.
Right. Right now there's a lot of deer. I've seen 8 bucks that guys have sent me this week that they've killed, just monsters, just here at home. And we've seen seeking pretty much just starting here.
Yep.
Just a little bit of a trickle. Chase basically hitting right around Halloween or November 1st, right around there.
And that's what you guys have on the calendar?
That's what we have on the calendar. And it kind of goes from there. And then tending all the way through, late November. And like I said, I don't like to use observational.
Sure. But that's
research. But basically my buddy last night, I said he was crazy, but he had just about 140 inch 8-pointer just blew up his decoy last night. And he watched it come in, and he said, well, it came in a quarter away. And I said, okay. And the shot was where? He said, well, I decided to pass it up. I said, oh my God. And I said, let me guess. He pinned his ears back and he just destroyed that thing and then took off like a bat out of hell. He said, how'd you know? I said, well, that's typically
that's what they do.
Feeling his oats. But the calendar, like I said, we've been doing it for 30 years. If anything, it's a beautiful calendar. It's a wall calendar.
Yep.
And then the rut dates basically are what Charlie gave us before he passed away. As he said, basically he gave us that formula. He said, take it back at 2 weeks out. And then the other thing too, which when I always talk to him, I think we had this conversation, Jeremy, but we always talked about baseball. We didn't talk about.
I know, man. Yeah.
We love baseball, but he said that thing's going to repeat itself every 5 years. So he said, just look at the data And he said you can almost set your watch by it. And he
Some
was
sort
right.
of cyclic cycle, basically.
Yeah, it's almost like a grouse or woodcock cycle or snowshoe hares or whatever. But,
It's interesting, you know, and then, like Jared said, like I'm obviously from the science side, I come in as a pure skeptic on anything moon. Now that said,
before you say this, I'm just curious, how does it change very much? Like from year to year, is it like? It
varies. You know, it's only like a week, maybe 5 to 6 days off. You know,
it does though,
depending on the year, because everybody says rut happens the same time every year. Yes, it does. But one year you see gangbuster activity on Halloween, and then the next year it's like more like November 7th or 8th.
Yep.
And why is that?
And to your point, Dan, there is a lot of factors, right? Weather being one, like, you know, the big thing I always hear people, and I think that it's the biggest factor is the temperature, right? Everybody says like, oh, it just got cold, like the rut's about to happen. BS. No. Like it can be 85 degrees on the first week of November. The rut is still occurring. It may only be happening at night and you may not be seeing it, and it might not be as active as we want, but it's occurring, right? So the temperature has zero effect on the actual timing of the rut. Could suppress activity? Yes.
Daylight.
Could change daylight activity? Absolutely. The moon thing's an interesting one because we know, and we've beat this a little bit on the podcast in the past, we know that the moon affects tidal changes and it has effects on feeding windows, especially on fishing, right? Because of the way that the gravitational pull and things are like that. How that transmits to the animals, and he called me while we were on this podcast, so I'm going to throw him under the bus here, but is Ben Rising sent me a picture of a bobcat in the middle of the day on October 23rd, which was his red moon start. He killed a buck.
Tell Ben I hunted on October 3rd and I didn't see shit.
I know, right? He killed a buck on October 23rd, the night of the 23rd. And again, I'm picking.
A giant.
I know. He killed one yesterday as a giant too in
Where?
Illinois. I'm picking on Ben because I know he's a red moon guy and he knows that I'm still a skeptic on it. But it's funny because that is positional based, right? Versus what Charlie is doing here, which is truly timing of phase base.
Right. I'm
stuff.
Curious. Do you think you're aware of the red moon?
Like, actually, no, I'm not.
Oh, are you aware of like the Moon Guide? Adam Hayes is the guy that owns that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So what that is like it's their calendar that is, you know, calendar of the red moon. So we talked to Adam a couple weeks ago. Basically, what the red moon.
We didn't know like how, like what it was.
The red moon by definition is, you know, certain days that the overhead or underfoot moon times are within 3 or 3.5 hours of sunrise or sunset when peak activity should be happening anyways. So I guess that kind of nullifies my next question, but I was going to ask if you thought there was any like overlap or like if the red moon had anything to do with.
I'm sure. So Dan, tell me again, what did you have for your peak activity there for seeking, I guess?
Peak for seeking was 2 days ago. This week, actually.
Which coincidentally is also the red moon.
Really?
The red moon, according to Adam and the Ben Bible, is the 23rd to the 28th of October.
We had seeking from the 23rd to the 30th.
So they are very different theories because one is purely phase based, where the other one is overhead underfoot, closest to the earth within time frames. But interesting how there is overlap in the two. Now, again, the one thing with the red moon that I didn't understand until we talked with Adam is that he's not claiming anything to do with breeding. It is purely a movement-driven indicator. Whereas Charlie was very focused around timing of the rut.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And are you familiar with Charlie at all?
Just from our conversations on this podcast.
How big was Charlie's facility that he did a lot of observations in?
You were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
Oh, it was fabulous. It was a couple hundred acres. I can't remember. 300-400 acres.
Fence facility where he would do. This is where he got a lot of his great photography.
Didn't hunt it. It was just basically he used it for photography.
Yep.
But those deer. I always use the example of who's the woman that followed the monkeys around?
Jane Goodall.
Charlie was the Jane Goodall. Right? That was a Craig quote. Charlie was the Jane Goodall of the deer. And he could walk with those deer while I was with him when the bucks were rutting. And I was scared because these bucks were just thick necks and just, and they just it was almost like he wasn't there, but he followed those deer, and he that wasn't the pure basis, because he worked with Wayne LaReche, who was the commissioner for Vermont Fish and Wildlife, and Wayne actually helped him hone that. It was actually a lot of Wayne's work to begin with, but then they were using guys from across the country just to give them basically data sheets.
Interesting.
And then they plugged him in there, but Charlie didn't get too ramped up on it. He's like, listen, I'm not gonna pretend I'm a scientist here. I'm just basically giving you what I see, and like I said, people criticized, oh, you're just in this, Charlie didn't make any money off of this, and basically it was just like, he's like, there's something to it. And he really truly believed in it. And I mean, I don't base my life off of it, but at the same time, I look at it, I was like, you know what? This is, from what I'm seeing this week, this is pretty accurate for where I'm sitting. But I know it does not apply. And that's why when we had you do the South.
That's what I was just going to bring up. Yeah. I mean, if you look at so I would do a Southern rut prediction article for deer and deer hunting. And if you looked at yeah, I would write one.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of my gigs.
What was yours based on?
Biological data for the most part, with some variation there.
I didn't know that.
But if you look at, again, think of the Midwest.
If you want to do them again, I'll print them again. I know that.
Please, I'll give you my mailing address. I had to get that word in there because I'd like to see this.
We haven't had it for a while.
So again, if you think about the Midwest and the Northeast rut, like fairly consistent, right? I mean, really that, to Dan's point, seeking in the end of October, and then starting to get into the peak rut and stuff. If you look at the South, all over the freaking board, right? I mean, completely from top down to Mississippi, the northwest corner of Mississippi is mid-November. The southeast portion of Mississippi is February. And so this all ties back to a lot of the likely restocking efforts that took place in the South, which essentially, they moved deer from Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. They also moved deer from Texas and from Mexico. And essentially, you've got this just extreme variation from Texas to Florida in terms of when deer rut. And so what I would do is I would break down not just like by state, but literally by section of state or by known regions like Okeechobee in Florida or the Delta of Mississippi, and give ranges of when peak breeding would typically occur. And it is very consistent year to year, small variations. And so that's what I would try to look up. Is I would, from a science side, I would be pulling all this perspective, results and data collected, and using what the states had available basically, and say, okay, like if I'm planning a hunt, it's this in this area of the state, and it's pretty consistent year to year. But again, to Dan's point, buck to doe ratio, all these other things come in, and I hate to be the dead horse, that's where this private management comes into play. Because if I'm on a very well piece of managed ground in the Mississippi Delta, my peak rut might be mid-November. If I'm on a public land area where maybe it's not as managed well and the doe ratio is a bit out of skew, maybe it's Christmas. Because just the way that they call it the drip rut in the South in a lot of cases, where you would see some chasing activity, maybe mid-November, but you really knew that it wasn't till right before Christmas that things were hot and heavy. And we see that here too, right? I mean, we've all probably seen a doe get bred in, 20s of October, as well as, January and February, even in cases. So like we still see that, if you look at the curve, right, the bell-shaped curve, there are deer that get bred in October. There are deer that get bred in January and February and March, even though that's not great for us. But the majority of the deer get bred in that 2 to 3 weeks of November. So it's, and again, how that relates to the moon, I'm skeptical about it, but I'm sure there's some effect of gravitational pull and moon. The hard part about the phase side of it, and it's not necessarily the temperature or the buck to doe ratio that gets me, it's the cloud cover, right? Because essentially if there are cloud cover during a full moon phase, how does the deer know? It have to be gravitational or something, which would then go to the overhead underfoot theory, But the phase and cloud cover is the big question mark around.
Is it though? I mean, because the tides still happen, cloudy or not.
Yeah, but that's not based on moon phase. That's based on position of moon.
Right.
So when we talk about the phase side, and
Oh,
especially the phase side of the rut in relation to the autumn moon, basically, cloud cover should or could have some effect. I don't know. That's my side. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, it is an interesting. I mean, what is supposed to be the correlation? Because I mean, I don't.
Is it the second?
The calendar's not saying that deer are like looking at the moon and they're like, oh.
No, and that was just a part of it. As far as the moonlight, you know, how he was basically saying the moonlight in relation, basically adding in the trigger of decreasing daylight.
Yes.
With the addition of moonlight.
Which
That's
is
just one. That was just one.
And hold that theory, because that is the fact that the gland is affected by photoperiod, which releases testosterone, is a proven scientific, like, that is the trigger, right? The rut trigger is the fact that the more secretion of testosterone that happens, the closer to peak rut, but that's also in check with a doe coming into estrus, right? Those two things are happening. Like, a buck could have full testosterone. If that doe's not in estrus, the rut doesn't occur, right? The rutting activity, the pre-rut activity, the scraping, the fighting, things like that occur via testosterone. But truly, the doe is the master controller of the rut. How her cycle and estrogen happens in relation to something, timing, moon phase, position, who knows? I mean, we ultimately know that even based on the
But I don't know if it's a direct correlation to buck move. I mean, I understand how you can make the argument that it is, but like, and I think that, so here's my devil's advocate thing here. I have a hard time with anything that assigns a general deer will do this, deer will do that.
Absolutely.
I understand why they exist, and it's cool to try to quantify that stuff. I have no problem with that. But, you know, ultimately, all of these deer are individuals. And so, like, to your point, even if a doe, you're saying, is the master controller, yes, of being bred, but, like, ultimately, it's a buck's perception of what might or might not be happening. Because even if there is no doe in heat right next to him, if it's November 2nd, like, he knows that it should be happening. And so at some point, based on his discretion, he's going to get up and...
Well, and that's why I said the testosterone is still a factor there, because that testosterone increase has nothing to do with the doe. It has everything to do with photoperiod and the increase of, or the trigger of the pineal gland that then increases the testosterone level.
It is interesting. So, like, if anything, what you would say is, like, these deer should or should not be doing, like, the moon phases or red moon, whatever it is, like, ultimately what it's affecting or claiming to be affecting is, like, a buck's perception of what he should be doing at that given time.
Yeah, and Dan...
And that's affected by other factors.
Dan, have you chime in here, too. I think the one thing that we all... Like, none of the three of us, nor I think would a Charlie or even an Adam, would argue that, like, the deer peak breeding, like the actual breeding activity, is likely occurring in and around the same time. Here's the block. That said,
they do what?
They breed pretty much the same time every year.
Everybody agrees that?
I think so.
Okay.
What we're trying to put
when is it?
A finger on, same time every year. It depends what location. Like,
if
where I'm at,
November, just mid-November.
Yeah, where I'm at, I would say November 2nd to the 11th.
Okay.
What we're all trying to quantify, as well as Adam with the red moon, and is how do we predict or anticipate buck and deer movement to take advantage of it? In particular,
how do we maximize
daylight.
our odds? Yeah, of a buck walking in front of a stand.
So that's what we're looking at. Like, how do all, like, if I look at like Dan's calendar for the deer and deer hunting calendar, right? You guys have a seeking phase, you have a chasing phase. So those phases are, seeking is bucks are cruising, right? Bucks are out there cruising. That's a great time to be out. That's a great time to hunt scrapes, like, just be in the woods. Chase phase is all hell's breaking loose, right? Peak breeding is fact not when I want to hunt. That's lockdown.
Right.
That's not fun. It's slow, and it can happen at 1 p.m. because he came off a doe and he's looking for a new doe.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, after lockdown is better than that lockdown period.
Yeah.
So really, that chase phase, well, yeah, seeking phase, chase phase are the two, in my opinion, the best times to be in the deer woods. Peak breeding is not. That's lockdown.
Yeah, I think it helps to give clarity or maybe just context to like understand what as hunters we're trying to pinpoint is maximum daylight buck movement. Not necessarily, and maybe they are correlated, I'm sure they are, the rut.
Which is where I'll bring back the cloud cover conversation of, I think we've all observationally seen things happen with a full or new moon that kind of makes us scratch our head like, why are all these deer feeding in this field right now in the middle of the day?
Here, I know we've been at this for a while now, probably 2.5 hours, but I've noticed recently, more than any other year, and I've just probably got more cameras running in different properties, I have had more mature bucks show up on a property in this 3rd to 4th week of October than I've ever seen before. And I don't think it's because they're doing it for the first time. I just think I'm just now noticing it. Is that just a fall range shift? Or, and I'm talking, some of these are, I had 2 bucks over 160 show up on a small piece of property within 12 hours of each other that I hadn't seen. One I had never seen, one I hadn't seen since August.
Yeah, I mean, your ranges are increasing dramatically right now, you know, because we're approaching this essentially.
You think they're just covering more ground, or are they moving into that area?
This is seeking.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to actually be chasing or breeding a doe. This is seeking. I'm expanding my range at this point, right? And it could be by hundreds of or thousands of acres right now. Like, this is not where you get that buck that necessarily strays 3 miles, right? That happens usually during a chase or even the lockdown period.
Yep. Or on most of the does in the area if they've been bred.
If you can see those.
There you go.
That's why it's like that. They're not, you know.
Yes.
Those curves, it's not. That's the other thing you got to understand is you're going to see that October 15th.
Yes.
But that might just be, but the bulk of it is still, and then the other, the seeking, chasing, and tending, they all overlap.
Yep.
You might see, I mean, somebody saw a doe being bred this week.
Yep.
And that was probably one doe. I don't know why. They're all individuals.
I mean, normally the number one time I ever have in a stand is when that first doe goes into estrus in an area. If you can be in the stand, if you're lucky enough to be in the stand, I don't know how you project it, but if you're lucky enough to be in an area in the stand when that first doe goes into estrus, which typically is 23rd to the 28th for me, that's usually when it happens. It will be all hell breaks. You will absolutely see the best.
You think bucks can tell when a doe's gonna come into?
That's the pheromones,
which
we can't detect. That's the pheromone aspect.
Because I would imagine, like during the seeking phase, like they're just going and I bet they can tell which one is gonna come in first.
Well, they'll check them.
That's what I'm saying.
We've all seen bucks checking does in October. It's pheromones. That's what they're going through. They're nudging. They're pheromones. But as that testosterone, because of photoperiod, is increasing, the activity of what we consider. Here's the number one thing. When people talk about rutting activity, let's say general deer hunters, no knock to them, they talk about scraping and rubbing and fighting and eventually chasing, right? Rutting activity is the buildup of this testosterone that, yes, you see scraping. You see rubbing the moment testosterone pops up because they're shedding velvet, right? You see fighting, you see posturing, you hear vocalizations. All of these things are part of rutting activity. None of it is correlated directly with I'm about to breed a doe. It's just all the things that are happening hormonally with that buck to cause them to go crazy. Yeah. The moment that pheromone hits him, that estrogen cycle has reached its point, he loses his mind because that is the trigger that just blows his head off. And at that point, and so when Dan shows those curves for me, where that seeking and that chasing curve meet, that is the magical moment.
I wonder what that's like for a buck. Like, what if we had a rut?
Have we? The one thing
we just we all leave our jobs. We're wrecking cars into each other.
I laughed last year. I saw a buck. I think he was probably a 4-year-old. His neck was so muscular that it had to be cutting off blood flow to his brain.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just, you looked at it and it was just all shoulders, right? And his head on the top. I'm thinking like, this deer is out of his mind. He's not thinking straight.
It is funny. They're not. They really aren't. That's when the bucks a mature buck will walk right in and like look right up at you, and then he's like, "Wait, where'd my doe go?"
Yeah.
Not in October.
Dan, another thing that I wanted people to know, because I think it is such a strong resource, is that you guys are putting out content pretty frequently, still video content pretty frequently. And is it mainly on the YouTube side that you're cranking those out?
You can actually find it everywhere. Deer and Deer Hunting, it's YouTube, Deer and Deer, D&DH Online, YouTube.
Shows?
Facebook. Shows, yeah, we've got a ton. We're putting out over 225 videos a year.
Wow.
We've got Steve Bartella's Growing Big, Hunting Big, and Deertopia. Those are 3 shows.
Oh, wow.
We've got all of our TV shows, 4 of them on Pursuit Channel. That's including the flagship Deer and Deer Hunting show. And then we've got Deer Talk Now is an online one that I do. We've got I don't know, Deer Tech, but we've got them all on our website, deeranddeerhunting.com, and we've all got them on our YouTube page, Instagram, and we just started with small TikTok ones as well. So we've got just about anywhere you could go, you can find them. And
are you guys still, is it 9 issues a year that are going out?
It's 11 issues of the magazine. Yep. And you can find that there. It's the best deal in town. I think it's only $15 and we ship them to your door, or you can get them on you can get digital. That's at our website too, deeranddeerhunting.com.
You know, I think that, again, not to reminisce back to the deer camp side, but there's still something for me about receiving a paper magazine in the mail and like just being able to have it tangibly in hand and, flipping through. And I think that when we start to talk about all these topics, let's be honest, there's a bunch of bullshit out there right now from a deer side. And unfortunately, a lot of the general hunting public, like they're hungry for content. They're hungry for education, information. And the stuff that sometimes gets spewed out there is so twisted that they hold on to it, and that's what they truly believe, and that's what they ride out, and that's how they hunt. And it's not right? And it's not going to help them become a better hunter or teach somebody, a kid or whoever it might be, to be a better hunter. So I think that you guys have always done a really good job of being able to be, I don't know, fairly unbiased in the sources that you cover and the things that you talk about. But again, and it's so funny, you kind of you touched on Fred Bear talking about like, it's too niche of a vertical. Like, man, so many people just live that vertical. And when you say like, oh, it's just too tight of a vertical, like I'm just thinking of like how many different, rabbit holes we dug down in just 2 hours of a podcast.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm learning stuff every single day, even now. I mean, it's just, it's a fascinating animal. It's a fascinating lifestyle. I don't call it a sport. I think it's a life. If I want a sport, I'll go play tennis or something. I'm not gonna.
How dare you?
I'm not gonna equate it to that. But the magazine itself, we saw a real resurgence with COVID. I think we added 15,000 subscriptions last year.
Wow!
Just back up to over 100,000 now. That's awesome. People they want to. I think with a lot of people, it's like you said, it's just reminiscing back to if they're older, like when you bought baseball cards and got a Deer and Deer Hunting magazine and went to deer camp. I mean, it's something that is still there that I'm glad we can keep doing it. It's a dream come true job for me, obviously, but it's something that I know there's many millions of us enjoy and embrace.
And I know you might be slightly bashful about this, but I think it is worth acknowledging that you are now one of the owners.
Yes.
Which is a change, because people probably knew it as part of a bigger publication company.
Yeah, it was corporate for a long time. We were in Iola, Wisconsin forever, and then it was bought by a bunch of hedge fund owners from New York that as part of a bigger Krause Publications buy. And then we got it. Brad Rocks spearheaded that, and Steve Bartella. That was in 2019. So we're already 2 years into it being back individually owned, and not worrying about some anti-hunter
Yeah.
in an upper office thinking about what you do, you know, and then sitting there and have to justify your existence off a spreadsheet. You can just live the passion, and
Yep.
as long as people keep listening to us and reading our magazines, I think we're going to be okay.
It's awesome, man. Well, let's take an action item from this whatever, make a camp or however we want to do that for this year. I think that's something, well, by the time people are listening to it, it will be that time, but we can maybe take the initiative now since it's October 28th and try to run with something for 3 weeks just to see.
I think we should get everybody to take a picture of them at their deer camp, whatever that might be, even if it's in their house in the suburbs and they're staying home for the weekend. I think send us a picture from deer camp. I think that'd be a really cool thing.
Let's run with it, man. Well, Dan, we appreciate your time this morning, man. As always, it was good catching up. Please keep us posted on your hunting and stuff this year, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. We'll see you, buddy.
Yep.
That was cool.
Yeah. And again, the cool thing about deer hunting, number one, it was one of my first really cool industry relations when I got out of college. In fact, I had wrote for those guys while I was in college. Just started writing articles for them, and I probably have
taken anybody.
Mm-hmm. I see what you did there. I probably have 35 or 40 articles with them.
Cool.
Just a good group of guys, and you know they've always been really rooted in that. I did a bunch of deer hunting TV back in the day too.
Mm-hmm.
Just segments and stuff on a lot of different stuff. But like, it's funny that he brings up that Fred Bear comment because it is a very niche vertical, but dude, it's big.
Do you know? Yes, you're right. I'm sorry, my brain's wandering. Do you know Jay Peak used to shoot with Fred?
Yeah,
used to compete against him.
Jay was the guy who I went to bow work with. Like he would do all my bow stuff.
Really, I didn't know.
Yep.
You used to go to him a lot.
That was my guy.
He's getting up there now.
I know. Had so many bears in his place. And
still does.
Yeah.
Nice guy.
Super. Very, very knowledgeable guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But, well, yeah, I mean, it's November. Again, I think it'd be really cool to get people to take, because we're going to have a deer camp here in, oh my gosh, when do we leave? Like a week?
I know.
We're going to Illinois to bow
week.
hunt next week.
You could have a buck on the ground by then.
We're gonna find one, and we're gonna kill him. Yeah, I hope so.
I could too. We're gonna spend some time in the woods here.
Yeah, so we'll be in Illinois next week. So we'll take a picture of our deer camp.
By the way, I got out of that milk tasting.
Lactose intolerant, huh?
Yeah, I just played it cute. This was the way to get it out.
Milk hurts my belly.
So I'll be hunting.
Well, listen, if you're listening to this, it will probably be mid-November. Hopefully you have a deer on the ground. If not, now's the time to get in the woods and get after them. And if your gun season is about to start, be safe, shoot straight, enjoy it. We'll see you next week on the HUNTR Podcast.
Later.
Take me